Chapter 602. Wood Mansion Storehouse. Once they stepped into it, they immediately felt a fresh and clean aura. The Wood Mansion storehouse was actually like a paradise. The sky was azure. The clouds were gently drifting about like silk. The river was slowly flowing. Not far from the river was an exquisite pavilion building. Qin Yu and them stepped on the soft grass and walked toward the pavilion building. This is the storehouse. Many of the items have been casually placed in the grass or between the mountain rocks. However, the grandest spiritual treasures are all stored in that pavilion building. Jiang Lan pointed to the pavilion building and said with a smile. Qin Yu cast his gaze toward the pavilion building. At the same time, the spatial energy that originated from the new cosmos spread out and enveloped the pavilion building. Qin Yu was able to clearly see everything in the pavilion building. Sure enough, there are a lot of grandest spiritual treasures. Qin Yu knew in his heart that in terms of those useless grandest spiritual treasures, he was simply unable to compare with the god kings that had existed since the birth of the divine realm. There were over 20 grandest spiritual treasures casually placed in Jianglan's pavilion building. The majority of them were third-rate grandest spiritual treasures. There were 4 second-rate grandest spiritual treasures. However, these grandest spiritual treasures were all used to play with and admire. In terms of attack power, they were likely inferior to even ordinary heavenly divine artifacts. Following the wooden stairs, they entered the pavilion building. This pavilion building was extremely elegant and simple. On one side of the wooden shelves were some peculiar items. Of the 18 items on the wooden shelves, 12 of them are grandest spiritual treasures. These grandest spiritual treasures do not have much use. However, they are pretty good for admiring. Jiang Lan smiled. He walked to the side of the pavilion building's main hall and climbed up the stairs. Following him, everyone entered the second floor of the pavilion building. On top of a wooden cabinet in the pavilion building was a row of items. Jiang Lan casually waved his hand. 7 items floated in the air. Little Yu, of these 7 items, 6 are third-rate grandest spiritual treasures, and 1 is a second-rate grandest spiritual treasure. I'll leave them to you. Wow, Uncle Lan, this is so beautiful. Jiang Yin suddenly grabbed a small cyan-colored zebra. This could also be considered to be a flight-type grandest spiritual treasure. It is capable of enlarging the zebra. As long as one sits on it, one will be able to fly rapidly. Jiang Lan casually said. To a godly monarch, a flying auxiliary numinous treasure was meaningless. In Jiang Yan's mind, the scene of Jun Luoyu sitting on a horse and her hugging Jun Luoyu's waist from behind appeared. Uncle Lan, can you give this to me? Jiang Yin looked to Jiang Lan with her large eyes. Jiang Lan could only smile. How could he possibly refuse? After Qin Yu and the others left the Wood Mansion storehouse, a group of people gathered in the main hall to have a meal together. Everyone was happy and harmonious together. When Jiang Lan saw Qin Yu, Li Er and Jiang Yan, the 3 youngsters, he was also smiling the entire time. Qin Yu, when do you plan to melt down that grandest spiritual treasure? Halfway through the meal, Jiang Lan asked. Melt down? Qin Yu smiled and said, there's no need to rush. The time acceleration limit of my space can reach more than 10,000 times. No matter what, we have enough time. How about this, 3 days from now? I will enter my space and begin to melt down those grandest spiritual treasures. Furthermore, I will begin to craft artifacts. Jiang Yin immediately said, I also want to see you craft artifacts. Jiang Li did not say anything. She merely looked to Qin Yu with a smile on her face. She did not wish to make things difficult for Qin Yu. Lil Sis Yen I might take a very long time to craft artifacts this time around. That is because before I begin, I must adjust my state and strive to reach my peak state before I begin. Thus, I also do not know about the exact amount of time that I will be able to craft artifacts. Qin Yu tactfully refused. Jiang Yin pouted her mouth and humphed. Jiang Lan was suddenly startled. Immediately, Qin Yu, Jiang Yin and Jiang Li all looked to Uncle Lan. The 3 of them all had questioning gazes. Uncle Lan, what happened? Qin Yu asked. Jiang Lan said with a smile. Earlier, when I heard you talking about artifact crafting, I immediately thought of Zhou Xian. Thus, I spread out my divine awareness and covered the entire divine realm. However, I discovered that the Thunder Punishment City had actually invited Duan Mufeng over. God King level experts were able to search through the entire divine realm with a single thought. Duan Mufeng, Grandmaster Artifact Craftsman Duan Mufeng? Jiang Yin muttered. Doesn't that Thunder Punishment City have a Grandmaster Artifact Craftsman? Oh Yezi? Why would they invite Duan Mufeng over? Jiang Lan lightly laughed. I reckon that even the Thunder Punishment City does not possess enough second-rate Grandmaster spiritual treasures. Thus, they wanted a Grandmaster Artifact Craftsman to craft them. As for the other two Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen, they would generally require several thousand years to craft. Although the utmost North Sage Emperor had only given them 10 years, the God Kings of the Thunder Punishment City were also capable of creating their own space. Furthermore, the God Kings of the Thunder Punishment City also possess partial comprehension of the temporal laws. Thus, it was not hard for them to accelerate time by 1,000 times. At this moment, Qin Yu started to frown. He began to ponder in his heart. Could it be that they want the two Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen to join hands? That can't be right. Every single Grandmaster Artifact Craftsman possesses their own artifact crafting techniques. If the two of them were to join hands, it would instead affect both of them. As they were both Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen, Qin Yu naturally knew about this very well. Could it be? Qin Yu suddenly thought of a possibility. If that's the case, then the Thunder Punishment City is truly too rich and overbearing. Jiang Lan said with a smile. The way I see it, for the sake of victory, the Thunder Punishment City would likely have the two Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen craft their respective artifacts. At the same time, they would provide sufficient materials and Grandmaster spiritual energy. I reckon that the two Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen would take whichever one of them managed to craft a better Grandmaster spiritual treasure. Little Yu, it would seem that the Thunder Punishment City is determined to obtain it. Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu with a smile on his face. Qin Yu had a light smile on his face. Crafting a Grandmaster spiritual treasure is not something that would be useful just because there are more people. Qin Yu was extremely confident. In terms of crafting the artifact embryo, it was likely that only the craftsman god Cheho Yuan's tempered thousand hammer 100 refinement would be able to compare with his 9-spiral space rend. As for the tempering agent, if he were to have his clone help him, once the cold mist domain was unleashed, his control over the cold mist energy would definitely be much stronger than others. As for the spirit awakening, who would be able to compare with him? Zhou Xian sometimes, rather than relying on others, it is better to rely on oneself. Qin Yu said in his heart. Several days later, inside the wood mansion, Jiang Lan, Jiang Li and Jiang Yan were all looking at Qin Yu. Qin Yu had already decided to enter the new cosmos today, to begin melting down the Grandmaster spiritual treasures and artifact crafting. Little Yu, do not put too much pressure on yourself. Jiang Lan patted Qin Yu's shoulder. I know, Uncle Lan. Qin Yu lightly smiled. As for Jiang Li, she walked over to Qin Yu. Jiang Li knew that Qin Yu was going to work hard for the groom's search again. As for her, she could only quietly wait in the wood mansion. Standing on her tiptoes, Jiang Li closed her eyes and lightly kissed Qin Yu. She then opened her eyes and looked to Qin Yu. With a soft voice she said, Big brother Qin Yu, I will wait for you here. Qin Yu lightly smiled and also looked to Jiang Li. Wow, there are even sparks between the two of them. Jiang Yin made a big fuss from the side. Qin Yu and Jiang Li immediately started laughing. They looked to Jiang Yin beside them, inside the new cosmos purple mystic star. Qin Yu had already ordered Uncle Fu to not receive any guests in the floating cloud mansion in this period of time. Melting them down is the most time-consuming process. For the 7 Grandmaster spiritual treasures, I reckon it will take 10 days to completely melt them down. Qin Yu flipped his hand and took out a fist-sized strange stone. This was a third-rate Grandmaster spiritual treasure. Let's melt this first. With a movement of his body, Qin Yu arrived at a mountain peak of the East Hazy Mountain. He sat cross-legged on an enormous boulder on the mountain peak. Then, Qin Yu waved his hand. That Grand Mist spiritual treasure floated before Qinyu. Melting down Grand Mist spiritual treasures was relatively simple. However, there were two conditions. The first condition was that the Grand Mist spiritual treasure melted down must be ownerless. If it was ownerless and had been imbued with heavenly divine energy, it would not be melted down. The second condition was that the ownerless Grand Mist spiritual treasure must be burned for a long period of time. Furthermore, the flame must be the void flames. Generally, it would take an entire day of burning for a third-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure to completely decompose and release Grand Mist spiritual energy. As for second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures, it would take 3 to 4 days. Now that my strength has increased greatly, on top of this refining flame wristband, using the void flames is extremely simple. Void flames flew out from Qinyu's body. The void flames enveloped the fist-sized odd-shaped stone. Being burned by the void flames, the odd-shaped stone did not react at all at the beginning. However, as time passed, after nearly 2 hours had passed, the surface of the stone began to gradually change. As Qinyu continued to emit void flames from his body, the odd-shaped stone began to change more and more. After half a day, the odd-shaped stone finally let out a kacha sound and split into 3 parts. However, there was still no Grand Mist spiritual energy coming out from it. This Grand Mist spiritual energy will only be released after the Grand Mist spiritual treasure has been burned to the point of decomposition. Qinyu had a smile on his face. Qinyu knew very well that the Grand Mist spiritual energy and the Grand Mist spiritual treasure had a very deep connection. It would take a very long time for the Grand Mist spiritual energy to be released. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. At this moment, the odd-shaped stone had turned into countless granules. The granules were trembling non-stop. Suddenly, bang! The granules turned into ashes one by one. At the same time, an extremely small stream of air was released. Grand Mist spiritual energy. Grand Mist spiritual energy. It's Grand Mist spiritual energy. Qinyu's eyes immediately lit up. However, at this moment, Qinyu was completely stunned. Immediately after, another stream of air was released. Qinyu was still in a daze. Grand Mist spiritual energy. Grand Mist spiritual energy is like this? Qinyu felt a rumbling sound in his head. Immediately after, he grabbed with one hand and locked down a portion of the space, grabbing that bit of Grand Mist spiritual energy completely. Qinyu instantly disappeared from the East Hazy Mountain. At this moment, the new cosmos had already expanded to an extremely large extent. It contained an extremely large amount of cosmic space. Qinyu instantly appeared at the edge of the new cosmos. Standing at the edge, the space there was trembling. It was the most chaotic region. Freeze! Qinyu let out a low shout. His surroundings completely calmed down. Qinyu looked through the membrane and saw the boundless flower paste space outside the membrane. His gaze was incomparably strange. At every moment, a large amount of flower paste air would pass through the membrane and merge with the new cosmos. This caused the new cosmos to expand continuously. It could be said that every single breath of time, the flower paste air, absorbed by the new cosmos, was enough to fill a vast ocean. In the past, in Qinyu's heart, the flower paste air was a type of energy. It was a relatively ordinary energy that formed the universe. However, at this moment, Qinyu could no longer think of it that way. Grand Mist spiritual energy flower paste air? Qinyu looked to the Grand Mist spiritual energy that was floating unceasingly in his hand. He then looked to the omnipresent boundless flower paste energy that was being frantically absorbed by the new cosmos. It was exactly the same. Qinyu was the master of the new cosmos. When the flower paste air entered the new cosmos, Qinyu was naturally able to clearly analyze the essence of the flower paste air. He could also clearly feel the Grand Mist spiritual energy in his hand. It was exactly the same. Qinyu was stunned for a long time. This is the Grand Mist spiritual energy that so many god kings of the divine realm value? In order to refine Grand Mist spiritual treasures, they had to melt down a bunch of useless Grand Mist spiritual treasures. How many Grand Mist spiritual treasures are there in the entire divine realm? How many are there to melt down? At this moment, Qinyu was truly excited. With a thought, he grabbed with one hand A space with a circumference of 100 miles was locked down by Qinyu. The flower paste air within the space was also locked down by Qinyu. A circumference of 100 miles? Haha. Even if all the grand mist spiritual treasures in the entire divine realm were melted down, the amount of grand mist spiritual energy would not even be 1% of the total amount. Qinyu's entire body was trembling. Originally, I had thought that the grand mist spiritual energy was a special type of energy that was born in the universe. However, from the looks of it now, it is merely the most original type of energy that formed the universe. The most original type of energy. No wonder it has such a miraculous effect. Qinyu understood everything. Why was it that when he refined grand mist spiritual treasures in the past, the refining speed would increase after absorbing some grand mist spiritual energy? It turned out that the grand mist spiritual energy was the most important thing for grand mist spiritual treasures. Calm down, calm down. Qinyu forced himself to calm down. After all, he still needed to go and refine artifacts. With such an excited state of mind, it would be strange if he didn't make any mistakes when refining artifacts. However, the boundless flower paste air before his eyes passed through the membrane and crazily rushed into the new universe. Then, he looked at the boundless flower paste space on the other side of the membrane. All of this was grand mist spiritual energy. Seeing all of this, how could he calm down? Qinyu took a deep breath. Then, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to adjust his state of mind. Uncle Lan's painstaking efforts and Li Er's kind intentions were clearly remembered by Qinyu. Touching his lips, Qinyu still remembered the feeling of Li Er kissing him. With so much grand mist spiritual energy, what do I have to fear when refining artifacts? Qinyu had a tranquil smile on his face. His state of mind was slowly transforming. The moment when his state of mind reached its peak was the moment when Qinyu began to refine artifacts. Chapter 603. Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua had personally set up a space in the Northwest region's Thunder Punishment City. Furthermore, he had accelerated the time within the space by 5,000 times. Maintaining a space where time was accelerated by 5,000 times was already a challenge for Zhou Hua. He was not the Azura God King, who could easily maintain a space where time was accelerated by 10,000 times. Imperial Father, although the two Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen are very powerful, it is still very hard to say whether or not they will be able to refine powerful second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. If they fail, Zhou Xian looked to his father. Zhou Hua shook his head and smiled bitterly. For the sake of his son, he had indeed put in a lot of effort. Don't worry, we have enough materials and Grand Mist spiritual energy. Logically, they should be capable of refining second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. But don't worry. Zhou Hua interrupted his son's words. Even if the Grand Mist spiritual treasures refined by these two Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen are not powerful enough to meet our requirements, they are still very powerful. How about I give you my Deafening Thunder Roar? The Deafening Thunder Roar was one of the more famous second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. It was a powerful spiritual treasure that Zhou Hua frequently used. It could be considered Zhou Hua's signature spiritual treasure. Thank you, Imperial Father. Zhou Xian was instantly overjoyed. With his father's words, he was relieved. Zhou Xian also knew that his Imperial Father, Zhou Hua, as the clan chief of one of the 8 great divine clans, possessed the Zhou clan's clan protection spiritual treasure. It was a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure that had appeared since the birth of the divine realm. Because that spiritual treasure was too powerful, Zhou Hua rarely used it. Normally, he would only use the Deafening Thunder Roar. Only at the most critical moment would he use that clan-guarding spiritual treasure. With the Deafening Thunder Roar, as long as Qinyu's gift is not a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, I will definitely win, Zhou Xian thought in his heart. The Deafening Thunder Roar could be considered to be one of the more outstanding second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Even Qinyu had taken out a peak second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. In the end, it was still up to the 13 God Kings to judge. As long as the disparity was not too great, he, Zhou Xian, would definitely win. At the moment when Duan Mufeng and Oyezi, the two Grandmaster artifact craftsmen, were painstakingly crafting artifacts. The current Qinyu was quietly sitting cross-legged at the edge of the new cosmos. Qinyu's state of mind became more and more ethereal, and his state of mind became more and more perfect. Quietly, Qinyu sat cross-legged, feeling the ethereal state of mind. At a certain moment, Qinyu felt that his entire body had reached a kind of peak state. He didn't know why, but Qinyu had a feeling at this moment. He knew that at this moment, he would definitely succeed in refining. It was a very mysterious feeling. Qinyu opened his eyes. At this moment, Qinyu had been sitting cross-legged for more than 10,000 years. Within 100 meters of Qinyu, there was complete silence. 100 meters away, the space was in chaos and trembling incessantly. This was because this was the edge of the new cosmos. The new cosmos created by Qinyu was constantly expanding. Qinyu stood up, and the robe on his upper body suddenly dissipated, leaving his upper body bare. Qinyu stretched out his hand, and the whirlwind-breaking hammer appeared in his hand out of thin air. With a wave of his hand, a black table appeared before him. "Clone," Qinyu muttered in a low voice. Then, a cyan gown Qinyu appeared beside him. The cyan gown Qinyu slightly bowed to Qinyu. "True body." Qinyu lightly smiled. Soon after, a section of the ancient red tongue tree's tree trunk floated to Qinyu's side. Qinyu pointed with one hand, and the tree trunk that was so thick that 3 or 4 people could wrap their arms around it immediately split into 4. In the center of the tree trunk was a nearly 2-meter-tall section of scarlet red wood that was as thick as an arm. Qinyu knew that this was the most important part of the ancient red tongue tree, its tree core. Other than its tree core, the best material for the ancient red tongue tree would be the divine wood that formed its trunk. As long as one was diligent in refining those divine woods, one would be able to refine them into high-quality heavenly divine artifacts. At the moment of artifact refinement, Qinyu had an intense urge to only use the tree core and a portion of the trunk to refine a grand spiritual treasure. "Ho!" Frightening flames suddenly erupted from Qinyu's left hand. The flames were mainly separated into white pure flames and void flames. For a top-quality material like this, the black divine flames were useless. That section of tree core landed on the black table before Qinyu. Flames were revolving around the tree core. As if it was floating on water, the 2-meter-long section of tree core continued to float above the void flames and white pure flames. Holding the whirlwind space-shattering hammer in his hand, Qinyu smashed down with the hammer. A whistling sound was heard. As the whirlwind space-shattering hammer passed through, ripples appeared in the surrounding space. 9 spatial vortexes immediately surrounded the tree core. As for Qinyu's hammer, it smashed into the center of the tree core. Bang! Cracks appeared on the extremely tough and durable tree core after being smashed by Qinyu's hammer that contained spatial energy. Generally, expert artifact refiners would not destroy such a perfect tree core. However, Qinyu was not that sort of mediocre person. The way Qinyu saw it, the correct path was to destroy and then rebuild. The frequency of Qinyu's hammering was constantly changing. Sometimes the hammering sound was as gentle as a spring breeze, but sometimes it was as intense as thunder. The scarlet red tree core had already turned into a scarlet red liquid that was constantly flowing. This was the tree core, the essence nurtured by the ancient red bronze tree's energy. Whoosh! The whirlwind space-shattering hammer emitted 8 spatial vortexes that completely swept up the scarlet red liquid and enveloped it with flames. One could even see with the naked eye that there was a light flowing within the scarlet red liquid. Beads of sweat seeped out of Qinyu's forehead. However, the beads of sweat instantly disappeared. During the artifact refinement process, Qinyu did not allow anything to affect the artifact refinement process. It's about time. This time, Qinyu used very few materials for the artifact refinement. He only used the tree core and 2 portions of the main divine wood. The main divine wood that required 3 to 4 people to encircle was split into 4 portions. Qinyu took 2 portions, but even so, the 2 portions were extremely large. Combined, 2 people might not be able to encircle them. However, when they were combined, their volume was. The artifact embryo is formed. Qinyu extended his hand and a scarlet-red scepter appeared in his hand. This scepter was only 2 meters long. Even the handle of the scepter was only 2 inches thick. Even the tip of the scepter was only the size of a fist. Clone, prepare to quench the flames. Qin Yu waved his hand, and the scarlet-red scepter immediately flew into the air. As for the azure-robed Qin Yu, his body naturally emitted an azure-colored aura, the cold mist domain. Within the cold mist domain, the metal elemental heavy water swam like a dragon. The azure-robed Qin Yu very easily controlled the cold mist aura and the metal elemental heavy water to encircle the scarlet-red scepter. The flexibility and toughness of the scepter were constantly increasing. It's done. Qin Yu's face had a hint of joy. At this moment, the azure-robed Qin Yu also withdrew his cold mist domain. The quenching this time was nearly perfect. The scarlet-red scepter flew back to Qin Yu. Primordial spiritual energy. Qin Yu stared at the distant, seemingly endless streams of flower paste. He couldn't help but make a grabbing motion with his hand, causing a large amount of primordial spiritual energy to fly towards him. The primordial spiritual energy completely enveloped the scarlet-red scepter. Qin Yu closed his eyes. Streaks of light flew out from his hands and landed on the scarlet-red scepter. Instantly, the scarlet-red scepter began to shine with a dazzling light. There was even a jade-green light that swirled around the surface of the scepter. Formation Universe, Spirit Awaken. On the scarlet-red scepter, the dazzling light began to conceal itself. The jade-green light also quietly concealed itself, condensing at the tip of the scarlet-red scepter. A hint of a smile appeared on Qin Yu's face. He extended his hand, causing the scarlet-red scepter to float in front of Qin Yu. Qin Yu felt extremely good. Congratulations, true body. The cyan gown Qin Yu bowed and said. Qin Yu smiled and nodded. His clone immediately disappeared. Qin Yu's gaze turned to the scarlet-red scepter. He began to carefully inspect it. The scepter's entire body was like a scarlet-red crystal jade. The tip of the scepter was completely jade-green in color. I wonder what grade this scepter is. Although Qin Yu was an artifact refiner, he was unable to use his eyes to observe primordial spiritual treasures. Only by dripping blood on it would one be able to clearly determine the grade of the primordial spiritual treasure. I hope it's a first-rate primordial spiritual treasure. Qin Yu began to look forward to it. He immediately dripped a drop of blood onto the tip of the scepter. Like water falling onto the surface of the sea, the blood was directly absorbed by the scepter. Qin Yu immediately realized the function of the scepter. Its attack power is this strong. Qin Yu was overjoyed. First-rate primordial spiritual treasure. It is indeed a first-rate primordial spiritual treasure. The might of the scepter caused even Qin Yu's heart to be moved. Once the scepter appeared, it would be able to lock down space. At the same time, the tip of the scepter would be able to produce tens of thousands of branches that would completely trap one's opponent. Once one was trapped, even if one possessed teleportation techniques, one would not be able to escape. Furthermore, this scepter itself was incomparably tough. It was completely capable of being used as a spike club to attack one's opponent. First-rate primordial spiritual treasures are truly powerful. However, I reckon that in terms of binding power, it is still inferior to that dark and yellow energy of mine. Qin Yu thought in his heart. When he was thinking about this, Qin Yu still had an unconcealable smile on his face. I'll show it to Uncle Lon Li Er in them. At this moment, Qin Yu only wanted to tell this happy matter to Li Er, Uncle Lon and them. Qin Yu directly disappeared from the new cosmos. Inside the wood mansion, right after he returned to the wood mansion, Qin Yu immediately spread out his spatial energy. He immediately found Jiang Lan and Jiang Li. Uncle Lon Li Er, I've succeeded. Qin Yu's excited voice was directly transmitted into Jiang Lan and Jiang Li's minds. At this moment, a boom suddenly sounded from the sky. The sky that was originally clear and bright was suddenly covered by red clouds. Succeeded? Jiang Lan was slightly startled. Could it be that little Yuhi? Jiang Lan swept out with his divine awareness and discovered Qin Yu. At the same time, he also noticed the scarlet scepter in Qin Yu's hand. With his experience, he was naturally able to sense that this scepter was extraordinary. With a movement of his body, Jiang Lan arrived beside Qin Yu. As for Jiang Li, she also quickly ran over. Her face was filled with excitement. What's going on? At this moment, Qin Yu noticed the abnormal phenomenon in the sky. The entire sky had turned scarlet red. Even the earth of the divine realm had been dyed red. At this moment, practically everyone in the divine realm noticed this scene. Jiang Lan raised his head to take a glance. After that, his eyes shined. He directly asked Qin Yu, "Little Yu, you've managed to craft a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure?" "Uncle Lan, how did you know?" Qin Yu asked with a smile on his face. Jiang Lan laughed heartily. "Haha, in the divine realm, only the birth of a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure would cause the heaven and earth to turn scarlet red, and cause spiritual treasure lightning to descend." Spiritual treasure lightning? Qin Yu was confused. Back then, the craftsman god Cheho Yuan had crafted a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure for the Azura God King. In the divine realm, it was something that was passed down from generation to generation. However, Cheho Yuan himself did not describe it in detail. It was as if he did not care much about it. Only after knowing more about Cheho Yuan would one know that Cheho Yuan's goal was the exalted celestial spiritual treasure. Likely, only the creation of an exalted celestial spiritual treasure would cause him to be truly happy. It's a kind of tribulation lightning. It has only appeared once in the history of the divine realm. Its power is not very strong. As long as you let that scepter block it, it could be considered a success. Although it is said to be tribulation lightning, the way I see it, it could only be considered as the sign of the birth of a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Jiang Lan did not care about that tribulation lightning in the slightest. Red clouds covered the entire sky and covered the boundless sky. In the boundless sky, streaks of all kinds of lightning shot down from all directions. Like fireworks, the countless streaks of lightning illuminated the entire divine realm. In the end, the countless streaks of lightning gathered together and formed a 7-colored lightning bolt. It directly smashed down toward the floating snow city's wood mansion. This lightning doesn't seem to be very powerful. Right after the lightning entered Qin Yu's spatial region, Qin Yu immediately sensed it. Casually, he had his scepter soar into the sky. Bang! The 7-colored lightning struck the scepter. Lightning radiated in all directions. It merely caused the scepter to become even more dazzling. However, the scepter was not damaged in the slightest. Sure enough, it cannot be considered to be tribulation lightning. Qin Yu nodded in his heart. Qin Yu suddenly thought of something. According to what Uncle Lan said earlier, the red clouds covering the sky, and the descent of the spiritual treasure lightning, was the omen of the birth of a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Wouldn't this allow the entire divine realm to know that I have refined a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure in the Wood Mansion? Haha, the attraction of a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure is truly enormous. Qin Yu, that big brother of mine has come, Jiang Lan suddenly said to Qin Yu with a smile. Qin Yu was slightly startled. Even that Jiang Xing has come. Jiang Lan shook his head and lightly laughed. At this moment, the 3 great god kings of the floating snow city were about to gather in the Wood Mansion. Chapter 604. Red clouds covered the sky. As the spiritual treasure thunder descended, there was simply no need to spread the news of the birth of a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Anyone who knew about the matter of the craftsman god Cheho Yuan refining a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure would know about it. Another first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure was born in the divine realm. First-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure? It's in Snowfall City. Within the Thunder Punishment City, Zhou Xian looked in the direction of the floating snow city. His gaze was extremely complicated. Could it be that Qin Yu? The matter was very simple. Other than the missing craftsman god Cheho Yuan, there were only 3 Grandmaster Artificers in the divine realm. Among them, Duan Mufeng and O Yezi were in the Thunder Punishment City. This new first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure could only have been refined by Qin Yu or Cheho Yuan, who had reappeared. Regardless of whether it was Cheho Yuan or Qin Yu who refined it, it didn't mean much, because Qin Yu was the new master of the bewitching god temple, and could be considered Cheho Yuan's successor. Even if Cheho Yuan was refining it, he was probably refining it for Qin Yu. Imperial Father. Zhou Xian looked at Zhou Hua beside him. Zhou Hua's expression was complicated as he said in a low voice, "Stay here. I'll make a trip to Floating Snow City to check on the situation." Yes, Imperial Father. Zhou Xian could only persist in his heart. Until the end, he would not give up no matter what. At this moment, the two master craftsmen who were still in the space maintained by Zhou Hua had no idea what was happening outside. Inside Zhou Hua's space, they couldn't see what was happening in the divine world. It wasn't just the Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua, the utmost East Sage Emperor Huang Fuyu, the Azura God King, the utmost South Sage Emperor. All the experts had rushed to the Floating Snow City. A single first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure was sufficient to move the hearts of practically all the God Kings in the divine realm. At this moment, the Floating Snow City had become the place with the most God Kings. More than half of the God Kings in the entire divine realm had gathered here. Inside the Mu Mansion. What about the scepter? Once Jiang Fan walked over, his gaze was fixed on the scepter that was floating in the air. However, Qin Yu extended his hand and retrieved the scepter. Jiang Fan looked to Qin Yu. He displayed a smile on his face. Qin Yu, is that scepter the new first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure? Exactly. Qin Yu nodded slightly. Qin Yu had a pretty good impression of Jiang Fan. After all, in the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace, Jiang Fan had supported him. Especially last time, Jiang Fan had clearly stood on his side. May I know who refined this first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure? Jiang Fan asked. Jiang Fan naturally knew about the relationship between Qin Yu and Cheho Yuan. He was even guessing in his heart whether or not it might be Cheho Yuan who had come to help Qin Yu. Jiang Lan stood to the side and said with a smile, "This scepter was personally crafted by little Yu." Oh, the gaze that Jiang Fan looked to Qin Yu with immediately shined. The new craftsman god. In Jiang Fan's heart, Qin Yu's status immediately increased by a large amount. Jiang Fan then glanced at the somewhat restless Jiang Li who was standing beside Qin Yu. "Oh, Li Air, you're also here. Seems like you're already familiar with Qin Yu, right?" Jiang Fan said with a smile. At this moment, Jiang Fan wished even more for Qin Yu to become his son-in-law. To have a new craftsman god become his son-in-law. How wonderful of a thing would that be? What did a new craftsman god signify? It signified that his utmost North Floating Snow City might obtain a new first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Although it required sufficient materials, sufficient Grand Mist spiritual energy, and Qin Yu to be in a very good state when crafting the artifact. Although it was very difficult to satisfy all three requirements, there was still hope, no? Eldest uncle, second uncle. A young man wearing a purple gown walked in. It was the Floating Snow City's third god king Jiang Xing. As a second-generation descendant of the Jiang clan, Jiang Xing was able to reach the god king level. His willpower and talent were both extremely astonishing. Earlier, when I saw the red clouds covering the sky and the spiritual treasure lightning descending upon our Floating Snow City, I had been thinking the entire time. In the entire Floating Snow City, other than Brother Qin Yu, there is likely no one else capable of crafting a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. This Jiang Xing was extremely enthusiastic. He, a grand god king, actually addressed Qin Yu as Brother Qin Yu. In the divine realm, practically all of the god kings would treat a craftsman god as an equal and treat him with great respect. That was because all of the god kings wanted a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. If they had one, they would want a second. If they didn't have one, they would naturally want one even more. From this, it was not hard to imagine the status of a craftsman god. Ever since the disappearance of the craftsman god Cheho Yuan, many god kings had been disappointed. The birth of a new craftsman god had brought hope to even more god kings. To possess a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, one would be a peak existence among the numerous god kings. After all, the majority of the god kings were only at the first level of the temporal laws, time acceleration. A small portion of the god kings did not possess the slightest comprehension of the temporal laws. Only a single person, the Azura god king of the divine realm, he had comprehended the second level of the temporal laws, time stop. It was precisely because of this that the Azura God King became the publicly accepted #1 God King. Back then, when he did not possess a first-rate Grand spiritual treasure, he had relied on the remarkable ability Time Stop to not fear the 8 great sage emperors. After he obtained a first-rate Grand spiritual treasure, even the 8 great sage emperors were no match for him. Haha, today is truly lively. Jiang Lan suddenly started laughing. Jiang Fan and Jiang Xing also started laughing. Jiang Fan looked to Jiang Lan. Second brother, those God Kings are all outside. Should we allow them to come in? Everyone, it's better for you all to come in, Jiang Lan said with a clear voice. Those God Kings were still rather concerned about Jiang Lan. Jiang Lan's strength. It was rumored that he was a bit stronger than Jiang Fan. Most importantly, Jiang Lan had already given the first-rate Grand spiritual treasure gauze feather blade that he had just obtained to Jiang Lan. After all, a single first-rate Grand spiritual treasure was already sufficient. Jiang Fan had given the gauze feather blade to Jiang Lan. Firstly, he hoped that the relationship between him and Jiang Lan would ease up. Secondly, he wanted to increase the strength of the utmost northern region's floating snow city. Haha, I am truly envious of brother Jiang Fan. Following the loud laughter, a middle-aged man with long scarlet hair walked in. It was the utmost West Sage Emperor of the Mount Blazing Flame. Behind the utmost West Sage Emperor was another man with long scarlet hair. Evidently, this man was another God King of the utmost western region's Mount Blazing Flame. O Qin Yu, in our utmost eastern region's Mount Dazzling Gold, you did not manage to obtain a single first-rate Grand spiritual treasure. After you arrived at the floating snow city, you only managed to gift brother Jiang Fan a single gauze feather blade. And now, you've even managed to craft a first-rate Grand spiritual treasure yourself. Sigh, you truly make me jealous. The utmost East Sage Emperor Huangfu walked over in the air while smiling. Behind Huangfu were 2 other people. The 100 Flowers God King Huangfu Liuxiang, and the Gold Sword God King Huangfu Lei. These 2 God Kings both smiled to the crowd. Then, they turned their gazes to Qin Yu. Qin Yu, you've truly become more and more amazing. I knew that my eyesight was pretty good. Following that gentle voice, that bewitching blood demon queen also walked over. Qin Yu could only squeeze out a smile. Heavens, aren't there too many God Kings? Qin Yu felt a burst of fear in his heart. Of the 8 great sacred lands of the divine realm, the Mount Dazzling Gold that possessed a relationship with Qin Yu, the 3 God Kings had all arrived. As for the other places, they would generally have 2 God Kings. Only the Thunder Punishment City had only sent a single God King, Zhou Hua. Perhaps the Thunder Punishment City also knew that after fighting with Qin Yu for so long, Qin Yu did not have a good impression of them. Other than the 8 great sacred lands, several God Kings from the 3 great Ascender powers had also arrived. The gazes with which these God Kings looked to Qin Yu were filled with incomparable passion. Qin Yu, do you still recognize me? A gray-clothed man said to Qin Yu with a smile on his face. Qin Yu naturally knew this man. This gray-clothed man was the same gray-clothed man who had taken away Ho Fei. At this moment, this gray-clothed man had also arrived with the Azura God King. I am the Azura Sea's God King Pingtian. When I first met you, I never would have imagined that you were Cheho Yuan's successor. In the blink of an eye, you've become this powerful. The gray-clothed man said with a smile. The entire Wood Mansion was incomparably noisy. There were over 20 God Kings present. Back when they were in the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace, the God Kings were seated high above the Sage Emperor's palace. Thus, very rarely did they pay attention to the people below them. However now, one by one, the God Kings were all smiling at Qin Yu. All of their attitudes were extremely good. Although there is only a single step between a Grandmaster Artifact Craftsman and a Craftsman God, their statuses are extremely different. Seeing this scene, Qin Yu couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It was very normal. Grandmaster Artifact Craftsmen were only capable of crafting high-quality heavenly divine artifacts. At the very most, they would spend a large amount of materials and Grand Mist spiritual energy to craft second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. To God King level experts, second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures were not very attractive. However, it was different for craftsmen gods. Only those who were capable of crafting first-rate grand-mist spiritual treasures were qualified to be called craftsmen gods. Who among this group of people did not wish to obtain a first-rate grand-mist spiritual treasure? A large number of god kings were gathered. In the end, a grand banquet was held in a large guest hall of the Wood Mansion. As for the people that were participating in this banquet, other than Qin Yu, the others were all god kings. Even Zhongli was not present. There were a total of 24 seats in the main hall. Among them, 17 belonged to the 8 great families. 6 more belonged to the 3 great ascender powers. As for the final seat, it was Qin Yu's seat. In the banquet, Qin Yu became the most dazzling person present. Qin Yu. The Azura God King smiled as he raised his cup to Qin Yu. Qin Yu also raised his cup. The Azura God King continued. The scene of Brother Cheho crafting a first-rate grand-mist spiritual treasure, for me is still vivid in my mind. Never would I have expected that Brother Cheho's successor, Qin Yu, your artifact crafting attainments have already caught up to Brother Cheho's, and become the new craftsman god. I believe Brother Cheho would definitely be incomparably happy if he were to know of this news. Oh, that's right, Qin Yu, may I know where Brother Cheho is right now? Once those words were said, the entire guest hall grew completely silent. Cheho Yuan's whereabouts were a secret of the divine realm. After all, Cheho Yuan's whereabouts were something that even god kings were unable to determine. Even if they did not know, how could Qin Yu possibly know? Senior Cheho wholeheartedly pursued the pinnacle of artifact crafting. For the sake of reaching the pinnacle of artifact crafting, and crafting an exalted celestial spiritual treasure, Senior Cheho left the bewitching god temple long ago. As for his whereabouts, even I do not know, Qin Yu said honestly. Crafting an exalted celestial spiritual treasure? The god kings present looked at each other in dismay. They were all endlessly astonished. If Cheho Yuan was truly able to craft an exalted celestial spiritual treasure, then it would be a frightening matter. Brother Cheho's pursuit of the pinnacle of artifact crafting is truly admirable and worthy of respect. For this, we should drink a cup of wine. The Azura God King smiled and drank his cup of wine. The atmosphere of the banquet was very harmonious. No one mentioned that they wanted Qin Yu to help them. However, without batting an eyelid, all of the God Kings had pulled their relationship closer to Qin Yu. All of the God Kings had an extremely good attitude toward Qin Yu. On the surface, Qin Yu was also responding to them. However, Qin Yu knew very well in his heart. In the past, these God Kings were high and above. Yet now, they were all so courteous toward him. Wasn't it all because he had crafted a first-rate grand-mist spiritual treasure? Only with strength will one be able to obtain respect, Qin Yu thought in his heart. After the banquet ended, all of the God Kings roughly knew what had happened. Thus, they all enthusiastically bid their farewells to Qin Yu, and then left one by one. When the utmost East Sage Emperor Huangfuyu bid his farewells to Qin Yu, he said to Qin Yu with a smile, Qin Yu, to be honest, I hope from the bottom of my heart that you will fail to participate in the groom's search. Qin Yu could only smile bitterly. He had already guessed what the utmost East Sage Emperor was going to say next. If you were to fail, then it would be very possible for you to become my son-in-law. However, it would appear now that the possibility of you failing is too low. I am truly jealous of that Jiang Fan. Look, he's smiling so happily. Huangfuyu pointed to Jiang Fan, who stood not far away. Qin Yu could only smile. Your Majesty, Sage Emperor, even if I were to become the son-in-law of the utmost northern region's floating snow city, it would still be difficult for me to become the Misty Mystic Palace's palace master of Mount Dazzling Gold. If in the future your Majesty were to have Qin Yu help with anything, then Qin Yu would definitely not decline. Qin Yu immediately said. The utmost East Sage Emperor slightly nodded. With those words of yours, I am relieved. Well then, I shall return now. Let us meet again at the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace. Utmost North Sage Emperor's palace? Qin Yu understood in his heart that the next time they meet would be when the third chosen candidate spot was determined. I have already firmly obtained this third chosen candidate spot. Qin Yu thought in his heart. It would be strange if he didn't win with a first-rate grand-mist spiritual treasure. Furthermore, Those god kings, which one of them didn't want to establish a good relationship with Qin Yu? It was likely that the several sage emperors that had sided with Zhou Xian last time were all regretting their actions. After all, how could the benefits that the Thunder Punishment City had given them be comparable to the assistance of a craftsman god? As for offending a craftsman god, how much effort would they have to spend to eliminate the estrangement between them? To become enemies with a craftsman god? Only those with mental problems would become enemies with a craftsman god. There's still a long period of time before the third chosen candidate spot is determined. In this period of time, I'll gather some more precious materials and then use them with the endless Grand Mist spiritual energy to craft some more Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Qin Yu immediately made his decision. Chapter 605. In the Thunder Punishment City, Oyezi and Duan Mufeng, the two Grandmaster artifact refiners, had painstakingly refined Grand Mist spiritual treasures for so many years. The results of the two of them were finally out. Oyezi's condition was extremely good. He actually managed to refine a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. As for Duan Mufeng, he only managed to refine a third-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. He had wasted so many materials and Grand Mist spiritual energy for nothing. Oyezi, Duanmu, let's end the refinement here. Zhou Hu said to the two master refiners with a smile. Oyezi and Duan Mufeng exchanged glances, their eyes filled with doubt. According to the original plan, Zhou Hu had prepared enough materials to refine 4 Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Every Grandmaster artifact refiner would have to refine the Grand Mist spiritual treasures twice. Right now, they had only refined the Grand Mist spiritual treasures once. Oyezi couldn't help but ask in confusion. Your Majesty, you? Haha. It's better that I tell you all this. During the period when you all were crafting artifacts, a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure had already appeared in the divine realm. Although Zhou Hu was smiling, his expression was not very good. First-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure? Come into being? Was it nurtured by heaven and earth? Or was it refined by humans? Oyezi asked in shock. While you were crafting artifacts, I did not see the red clouds covering the sky when the first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure appeared. Zhou Hu shook his head and said with a smile, crimson clouds covering the sky. Such a scene would only appear when a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure was artificially refined. Who made it? Could it be that Cheho Yuan has returned? Duan Mufeng questioned. Oyezi said softly. Could it be that Qin Yu? Zhou Hu nodded and said, yeah, it's Qin Yu. He managed to refine a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. My son, Zhou Xian, no longer has any hope of obtaining the third chosen spot. When Zhou Hu saw Qin Yu take out a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, he had already decided to have his son give up on the third spot. There were a lot of people that came to visit Qin Yu. However, not a single person was able to find Qin Yu. This included Uncle Lan, Li and them. That was because Qin Yu had been crafting artifacts in the new cosmos the entire time. Without his consent, who would be able to enter the new cosmos? Time passed by. 1 year, 2 years. The day of the third selection was approaching. Jiang Li's mood was clearly much better than before. Qin Yu had managed to refine a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. The final victor of this groom's search was practically decided. Uncle Lan, has big brother Qin Yu not come out for the past few years? Jiang Li was a little anxious. Jiang Lan smiled and said, don't worry. Last year, Qin Yu had come out for a short period of time. However, he soon returned. That's why you didn't see it. Last year? Jiang Li was puzzled. When he came out last year, he came to borrow some artifact crafting materials from me. After all, my artifact crafting ability is not that great, and I have no use for those materials. Thus I gave them all to little Yu, said Jiang Lan with a light smile. In terms of artifact crafting, Jiang Lan was only proficient in spatial divine artifacts. As for the other weapons, his ability to craft them was insufficient. Borrow refining materials? Jiang Li frowned. Is big brother Qin Yu still refining? So what if he has managed to craft a high-quality heavenly divine artifact? Why must he work so hard? Jiang Li was unable to understand, At this moment, neither Jiang Li nor Jiang Lan knew that Qin Yu possessed a boundless amount of Grand Mist spiritual energy. Qin Yu also did not have the time to inform Li Er and them about this. Beads of sweat rolled down from Qin Yu's temples. Qin Yu carefully inspected the long whip in his hand. He displayed a satisfied expression. It's finally over. Qin Yu gasped in admiration. Even though I possess a boundless amount of Grand Mist spiritual energy, I still need a sufficient amount of good artifact crafting materials. A total of 80,000 years. In these 80,000 years, Qin Yu would always spend a relatively long time adjusting his state before crafting artifacts. He would strive to reach his best state. In these 80,000 years, Qin Yu had crafted a total of 73 Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Among the 73 Grand Mist spiritual treasures, there were 2 third-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures, 70 second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures, and a single first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Unfortunately, a large amount of precious materials were all spent on the Purple Mystic Mansion. Qin Yu sighed helplessly. Back then, in order to craft the Purple Mystic Mansion, he had indeed paid an enormous price. All those precious materials. Yet in the end, he only managed to craft a decorative high-quality heavenly divine artifact. As for materials capable of crafting a high-quality heavenly divine artifact, when supplemented with Grand Mist spiritual energy, one would be able to craft a second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Not many of the precious materials left behind by Che Ho Yuan remained. Later on, Qin Yu went to borrow some materials from Uncle Lan. Unexpectedly, Uncle Lan actually gave him that many precious materials. Only then did Qin Yu manage to craft a total of 73 Grand Mist spiritual treasures. In order to craft a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, materials, Grand Mist spiritual energy, ability to craft artifacts in one state, are all indispensable. Qin Yu gasped in admiration. He had crafted a total of 73 Grand Mist spiritual treasures. Only a single one of them was a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. The materials used to craft this first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure were extremely precious. Furthermore, Qin Yu's state was extremely good at that time. His state was even better than when he crafted the scepter. Qin Yu flipped his hand, and a dark green sword appeared in his hand. Light was circulating through the surface of the sword. At the same time, the sharp aura emitted by the sword caused even the surrounding space to tremble. I'll leave this water splitter sword in the new cosmos for the time being. With an intention from Qin Yu, this first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure was sent into the bewitching god temple. Qin Yu did not dare to bring this weapon to the divine realm. He feared that if he were to bring it out, it would once again cause a commotion. At that time, Qin Yu was unable to imagine what sort of reaction those god kings would have. It was best that he did not stir up too much trouble. Furthermore, Qin Yu did not plan to publicize the remaining 72 Grand Mist spiritual treasures. He planned to store them for the time being. It would not be too late to take them out at a suitable time. It should not be long until the day of the third chosen candidate spot's evaluation. Let's go out first. Qin Yu disappeared from the new cosmos. Jiang Li was extremely happy when Qin Yu returned to the divine realm. Thus, she spent the entire day with Qin Yu. Qin Yu also stayed in the Wood Mansion the entire time. Ho Fei and Kuro also frequently came to the Wood Mansion to stroll around. Little Yu, tomorrow is the day of the third chosen candidate spot's evaluation. Have you prepared your gift? Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu. Jiang Lan knew that Qin Yu had crafted a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. However, it was still hard to say whether or not Qin Yu would give that first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure as a gift. After all, it was a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. When they competed for the first chosen candidate spot, Qin Yu had already handed over one. How could he possibly hand over another one? This third chosen candidate spot, I am determined to obtain it. Qin Yu flipped his hand and took out that scepter. With this first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure scepter, 10,000 willows, how could Zhou Xian possibly make a comeback? In Qin Yu's heart, Grand Mist spiritual treasures were merely worldly possessions. For the sake of Li Er, why would he be unwilling to part with them? Jiang Lan nodded in satisfaction. The next day, The utmost North Sage Emperor's palace was bustling with noise and excitement as usual. The 13 god kings of the divine realm were seated high up in the palace. The various heavenly deities below were also chatting with one another. Frequently, there would even be people who would go over to Qin to chat with him. Qin had completely become the focus of the Sage Emperor's palace. Brother Qin, I've heard that you've crafted a first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure. I truly admire you, Zhou Xian, who sat beside Qin, said to Qin with a smile on his face. However, within the depths of his gaze was a trace of resentment. Qin was naturally able to guess what Zhou Xian was feeling right now. Haha, it's merely luck. Brother Zhou Xian, last time, Brother Zhou Xian was extremely confident in obtaining the third chosen candidate spot. What sort of gift have you prepared this time around? Qin asked with a light smile on his face. Zhou Xian's expression turned sluggish. Haha, Zhou Xian laughed hollowly. Regardless of how good the gift might be, it would still not be able to match up to Brother Qin's gift. Zhou Xian knew very well in his heart that the reason why he had won last time around was due to his help. It was all because his imperial father had secretly helped him and made those saint emperors support him. However, as a judge, although they could be biased, they could not be too obvious. For example, if Qin were to take out a first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure and Zhou Xian's second-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure, how could they not be biased? No matter how biased they might be, they could not insist that a second-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure was better than a first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure. Thus, if the disparity was too great, they would not be able to help even if they wanted to. Furthermore, Qin's status had changed enormously. He was now the new craftsman god. Those sage emperors were all regretting that they had helped Zhou Xian and offended Qin. Today, how could they not help Qin? How could they possibly be biased toward Zhou Xian? Even if Qin and Zhou Xian both possessed second-rate grandmiss spiritual treasures, and even if Qin was slightly inferior, it was likely that the sage emperors would still support Qin. Everyone. The utmost North Sage Emperor Jiang Fan stood up. His face was brimming with smiles. With a clear voice he said, "Today is the day when the third chosen candidate spot will be judged. According to the rules that were set up back then, today's gift will be judged based on whose gift is more precious. Haha, the judging this time around is much easier than last time." Jiang Fan's gaze swept through the crowd. When he saw Qin, he slightly paused. He even slightly smiled to Qin. "Now the 17 candidates, please display your gifts. Let's begin with the final candidate," Jiang Fan directly announced. Immediately, the final candidate, the prince of the subterranean city, stood up. He walked to the center of the palace hall, slightly bowed and said, "God Kings, I forfeit this competition." Forfeit? The heavenly deities present all grew silent. They looked at each other in dismay. Merely, the various god kings above were still lightly smiling. Jiang Fan even slightly nodded and said, "Worthy nephew, you can withdraw first." Next, God Kings, I forfeit this match as well. 13 candidates forfeited in succession. Some heavenly deities did not understand. However, those candidates all knew the truth very well. More precious than a gift, if they were unable to even take out a second-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure, then it would be better for them to directly forfeit. Everyone knew that Qin had already crafted a first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure. As for that Zhou Xian, he even had 2 Grandmaster Artifact Craftsman craft artifacts. From this, it could be seen how determined Qin and Zhou Xian were to obtain the treasures. Next, Jiang Fan said indifferently, it was one thing for a single candidate to forfeit. However, for 13 candidates to forfeit in succession, this caused Jiang Fan to feel a bit displeased. At this moment, Zhou Xian stood up and walked to the center of the palace hall. God Kings. Zhou Xian bowed respectfully. He then said with a clear voice, "Brother Qin has already crafted a first-rate grandmiss spiritual treasure. Thus, I naturally do not have the face to take out a gift. I also forfeit." The entire palace hall suddenly grew quiet. Soon after it became noisy. The 2 great competitors for the groom search were Qin and Zhou Xian. This was something that many people had determined in their hearts. Unexpectedly, Zhou Xian actually directly forfeited. Qin Yu looked to Zhou Xian, who stood in the center of the palace hall. A smile appeared on his face. Forfeit? Oh, you forfeited. In that case Qin Yu had already made his decision. Zhou Xian returned to his seat. He then slightly smiled to Qin Yu beside him. Brother Qin Yu, it's up to you. Next. Jiang Fan's gaze turned to Qin Yu. Everyone present, including the various god kings above, were all looking at Qin Yu. All of the god kings had smiles on their faces. Their courteous treatment toward Qin Yu was something that all of the heavenly deities below were able to sense. Qin Yu stood up, and then walked to the center of the palace hall. Jiang Fan looked to Qin Yu with a burning gaze. What he looked forward to the most was that Qin Yu would be able to take out that first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. God Kings, my gift is. Qin Yu extended his right hand. A long whip suddenly appeared in his hand. This long whip is the highest level weapon among second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. Jiang Fan's smile grew slightly sluggish. The God Kings above were also stunned. Zhou Xian, who sat on the side, was also stunned. It was not a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. It was merely a top-level weapon among second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. Jiang Fan was stunned for a long time before he managed to react. He immediately displayed a smile on his face. This long whip is a top-level weapon among second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures? Amen. Jiang Fan had a satisfied expression. Qin Yu lightly smiled. After that he withdrew. At the moment when Zhou Xian forfeited, Qin Yu had already made his decision. There was no need for him to take out a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. This peak weapon among second-rate grand mist spiritual treasures was sufficient for him to obtain the third chosen candidate spot. After all, the others had all forfeited. As for the remaining Kuei Ho and Shinta Fan, how could they possibly be able to take out a first-rate grand mist spiritual treasure? They might not even be able to take out a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. Even if they were able to take out a second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure, it was likely that the majority of the God Kings would support Qin Yu, this new craftsman god. Chapter 606. Next person. Jiang Fan's clear voice resounded through the palace hall. Shinta Fan immediately stood up and walked to the center of the palace hall. God Kings, I forfeit this competition. Shinta Fan also forfeited. When Shinta Fan returned to his seat, he even winked and smiled at Qin Yu. Qin Yu was also able to sense that Shinta Fan was instead very happy. After all, it was actually Shinta Fan himself who was unwilling to participate in this groom search. It was his imperial father who had forced him to do so. After a short moment, Kuei Ho arrived. God Kings, Brother Qin Yu has already taken out his gift. I know that I am inferior, and thus decided not to take out my gift to embarrass myself. I also forfeit. Kuei Ho said. Kuei Ho was merely a palace master of the floating snow city. He actually only possessed a single second-rate grand mist spiritual treasure. It was bestowed to him by Jiang Fan. How could he, Kuei Ho, possibly take out such a precious gift? You can withdraw, Jiang Fan said with a smile. Jiang Fan naturally knew of his old subordinate's wealth. All 17 candidates had arrived. The display of their gifts had surprised many people. Of the 17 candidates, 16 had forfeited. Only Qin Yu had displayed his gift. The result was extremely clear. Brother Qin Yu, congratulations. When Kuei Ho walked down from the palace hall and passed by Qin Yu, he said to Qin Yu with a smile. Qin Yu lightly smiled. Jiang Fan stood up. He looked to the crowd and said, Everyone, from the looks of it now, there seems to be no need for us to judge. Of the 17 candidates, 16 have forfeited. Even if we wanted to judge, we would not be able to do so. Haha. The utmost West Sage Emperor from the Mount Blazing Flame also laughed. Jiang Fan nodded and said, Everyone, in that case, I shall announce the result. The various God Kings all nodded. Only then did Jiang Fan look to the crowd below. With a clear voice he announced, The third chosen candidate spot for this groom search shall be obtained by Qin Yu. Thank you, Your Majesty Sage Emperor. Qin Yu stood up. Furthermore, the whip in her hand also flew toward Jiang Fan. Since he had obtained this chosen candidate spot, this gift naturally belonged to Jiang Fan. Jiang Fan held the long whip with one hand and continued. The 3 chosen spots for the groom's search have been determined. 2 of them were obtained by Qin Yu, and 1 was obtained by Zhou Xian. So, 1 of them will become my son-in-law. Tomorrow, please submit the list of betrothal gifts to the Sage Emperor Palace. I will decide who will win based on the list of betrothal gifts and the performance of the 2 candidates in the process. In the end, the winner will be determined. The winner will send the betrothal gifts according to the list. The person who loses is not allowed to take it. Jiang Fan said with a light smile. Jiang Fan was not too greedy. He merely looked at the list and did not directly ask for their betrothal gifts. Send me the list tomorrow. After 10 days, I will officially announce who will become my son-in-law, Li Er's husband, in this Sage Emperor's palace. Jiang Fan's face was filled with smiles. Qin Yu and Zhou Xian below glanced at each other. 10 days, there's only 10 days left. Qin Yu muttered in his heart. After 10 days, he would have to openly marry Jiang Li. After that, everyone began to drink and chat enthusiastically. Only after the banquet ended did Qin Yu break away from the crowd and walk out of the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace. Outside of the Imperial City's gate, Qin Yu. This time around, Zhou Xian had left the Sage Emperor's palace even earlier than Qin Yu. He had been quietly waiting for Qin Yu outside of the city gate. What was this Zhou Xian planning to do? Qin Yu looked to Zhou Xian with a smile on his face. Brother Zhou Xian, I saw that you had left the Sage Emperor's palace early, so you were actually waiting for me here. May I know what important matter you have? It's nothing. I'm merely congratulating you, Zhou Xian said with a smile. He then asked, May I know what Brother Qin Yu's betrothal gift is? Only by knowing yourself and knowing your enemy would one be able to win 100 battles. This Zhou Xian actually came to ask him this question? Qin Yu lightly smiled and said, As for what the betrothal gift is, I have yet to completely determine it. May I know what your betrothal gift is, Zhou Xian? Regarding that, I still need to return and discuss it with my imperial father. Zhou Xian did not answer. Qin Yu sneered in his heart. This betrothal gift was most definitely decided long ago. After all, he was going to send the list of betrothal gifts tomorrow. However, Zhou Xian actually replied that he still needed to return and discuss it. It was clearly an excuse. In that case, Brother Zhou Xian, you can return and properly discuss it. I will not be accompanying you. Qin Yu immediately turned around and left. Seeing Qin Yu being so rude, Zhou Xian's facial muscles involuntarily twitched. He then sneered and led his subordinates away from the city gate. After returning to the floating cloud mansion, Qin Yu, Kuro and Hou Fei gathered together. Big brother, is your betrothal gift really that 1 million low-quality heavenly divine artifacts? Isn't that a bit too frightening? I reckon that even if it's a bit too much for you, that utmost North Sage Emperor still wouldn't believe it. Hou Fei muttered. Kuro also nodded and said, What the monkey said is correct. That utmost North Sage Emperor might not necessarily believe that you have 1 million low-quality heavenly divine artifacts. Qin Yu smiled. 1 million low-quality heavenly divine artifacts. If this was truly written on the list of betrothal gifts, then the utmost North Sage Emperor would definitely be very anxious. The utmost North Sage Emperor must be feeling anxious and unable to believe it completely. After all, even if all of the precious materials in the divine realm were added together, it would still not be enough to craft 1 million low-quality heavenly divine artifacts. However, what the utmost North Sage Emperor and them did not know was that the low-quality heavenly divine artifacts that Qin Yu had crafted were merely some ordinary materials. 1 million low-quality heavenly divine artifacts as the betrothal gift. That was a decision made in the past. Now I have changed my decision. Qin Yu pretended to be mysterious and said. Hou Fei and Kuro both looked to Qin Yu. This third chosen candidate spot was relatively easy to obtain. As for the first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure that I prepared beforehand, that scepter, 10,000 willows, I did not take it out. Thus, I have decided that the betrothal gift will be this scepter, 10,000 willows. Qin Yu said with a smile. Qin Yu had always pursued perfection in everything he did. A first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure as the betrothal gift. Even in the groom search, if his performance was the same as Zhou Xian's, he would likely still be able to obtain victory. Furthermore, in the groom search, he had obtained 2 candidate spots whereas Zhou Xian had only obtained 1. And now, his betrothal gift was a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. Was there any reason for him not to win? The next day, Qin Yu arrived at the Sage Emperor's palace by himself. However, right after he arrived at the entrance of the Sage Emperor's palace, he was stopped by the Sage Emperor's palace's guards. The heavenly deity bodyguard also recognized Qin Yu. He immediately said respectfully, "Lord Qin Yu, His Majesty the Sage Emperor has ordered that you and Lord Zhou Xian's list of betrothal gifts are to be handed over to me. I will pass it on to His Majesty the Sage Emperor. His Majesty the Sage Emperor has said that he will not meet with either you or Zhou Xianzhong for the next 10 days. This is to show fairness." Qin Yu came to a sudden realization. However, Qin Yu felt it to be ridiculous. Not seeing him and Zhou Xian? How could this be considered fair? Qin Yu flipped his hand and took out a golden scroll. He handed it to the heavenly deity bodyguard. The heavenly deity bodyguard bowed to Qin Yu again. "Lord Qin Yu, I will go and present this to His Majesty the Sage Emperor right away." Qin Yu nodded slightly. Then, he continued to stand before the Sage Emperor's palace's entrance. His spatial energy completely spread out and enveloped the entire Sage Emperor's palace as he carefully monitored the heavenly deity bodyguard. Qin Yu knew that this was the Sage Emperor's palace, and that the heavenly deity bodyguard would definitely not deliberately hide the betrothal gift list. However, in order to guarantee the victory of this groom search, Qin Yu would not allow any accidents to occur. He must personally see that the betrothal gift list was in the hands of the utmost North Sage Emperor. Under the coverage of his spatial energy, Qin Yu also saw that the utmost North Sage Emperor had received the betrothal gift list. Qin Yu was able to clearly see the excited expression on the utmost North Sage Emperor's face. Qin Yu's betrothal gift list contained the first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure scepter, 10,000 willows. "Oh, brother Qin Yu is also here." Zhou Xian's voice sounded beside Qin Yu's ear. Qin Yu turned around and saw Zhou Xian walking over with a smile on his face. At this moment, that heavenly deity bodyguard had already returned to the Sage Emperor's palace's entrance. When he saw Zhou Xian, he immediately said, "Lord Zhou Xian, His Majesty the Sage Emperor has ordered." The heavenly deity bodyguard repeated what he had told Qin Yu to Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian frowned slightly. He took a glance at the heavenly deity bodyguard. At the same time, Zhou Xian looked to Qin Yu. Qin Yu lightly laughed. "Zhou Xian, this is the Sage Emperor's palace. Are you afraid that this heavenly deity bodyguard would dare to deceive you?" Zhou Xian looked to the heavenly deity bodyguard and snorted coldly. Then, he handed the golden scroll to the heavenly deity bodyguard. "Brother Zhou Xian seems to care a lot about that betrothal gift list. Could it be that you think that you still have hope of winning?" Qin Yu sneered and said with disdain. Zhou Xian was naturally able to sense that disdainful tone. As for Qin Yu, he was surprised. If Zhou Xian did not have any hope at all, he shouldn't care about the betrothal gift list. However, from the looks of it, the betrothal gift seemed to be very extraordinary. Could it be that there was something more precious than a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure? Even if Zhou Xian's betrothal gift was also a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure, Qin Yu, who had obtained 2 of the selections, should still be able to win. Thus, Qin Yu could only use such a disdainful tone to provoke Zhou Xian. He wanted to see what sort of confidence Zhou Xian had. "I have no hope of winning." Zhou Xian took a glance at Qin Yu. He did not care about Qin Yu's mockery in the slightest. "Brother Qin Yu, we will know the result in 10 days. After he finished saying those words, Zhou Xian directly left the Sage Emperor's palace. Qin Yu looked to Zhou Xian's back and frowned. Exactly what sort of confidence does this Zhou Xian have? Could it be that he is putting on an act? Qin Yu stopped thinking about it. Qin Yu did not believe that Zhou Xian would still be able to win at this stage. Qin Yu and Zhou Xian both handed over their betrothal gift lists. In the remaining few days, everyone waited quietly. The utmost North Sage Emperor even announced that the Sage Emperor's palace would not accept outsiders during this period of time. Inside the Thunder Punishment City, Imperial father, would that utmost North Sage Emperor choose me to be his son-in-law because of that list? Zhou Xian was not confident in himself. That Qin Yu's betrothal gift list might be that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. Zhou Hu muttered to himself. Xianer, don't be anxious. If Qin Yu's betrothal gift list is truly that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure, I only have a 30% chance of success regarding the betrothal gift list that we handed over. Zhou Hu frowned. However, this is already our last resort. After all, you will only be able to obtain 1 out of the 3 spots. We can only take a gamble. Zhou Xian nodded slightly. Several days later, the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace announced the result. As for who the final victor would be, no one had 100% certainty. Days felt like years. This was the feeling that Qin Yu was currently experiencing. With every passing minute and second, Qin Yu's heart was filled with anxiety. This was especially true when Zhou Xian handed over the betrothal gift list. His expression and words caused Qin Yu's thoughts to run wild. Could it be that this Zhou Xian truly possesses some sort of powerful ability? Qin Yu guessed in his heart. No, this won't do. No matter what, I must win this time around. Qin Yu immediately stood up. At the same time, he spread out his spatial power. Qin Yu's spatial power was capable of covering a circumference of several hundred miles. Although the floating cloud mansion and the wood mansion were relatively far from each other, they were still within this range. There are no God Kings monitoring. Qin Yu's spatial power covered an area. All the movements of the God Kings were being monitored. Qin Yu directly teleported over and arrived in the wood mansion. Little Yu? Jiang Lan, who was sitting beside the pond, turned around to look. At this moment, Qin Yu had just walked in from the courtyard entrance. Uncle Lan. Qin Yu's face was slightly red. It was red from anxiousness. What's wrong? Jiang Lan was relatively calm. He immediately smiled and said, Oh, that's right. I don't recall seeing you enter the wood mansion's entrance. How did you suddenly arrive here? At this moment, how could Qin Yu possibly have the interest to talk about these things? Uncle Lan, let's not talk about this anymore. In these past 2 or 3 days, I have been feeling somewhat uneasy. Recalling Zhou Xian's expression when he handed over the betrothal gift list, I think that Zhou Xian ought to have some trump cards. I wish to request Uncle Lan's help in going to the utmost North Sage Emperor to investigate. If the utmost North Sage Emperor is truly biased toward Zhou Xian, then please help me speak to him and have him state his conditions. I will try my best to satisfy him. At this moment, Qin Yu was in a bit of a mess. Calm down, calm down, Jiang Lan said to Qin Yu with a smile on his face. Your current advantage is extremely clear. You do not have to worry too much. Qin Yu could only smile bitterly. How many years had it been? All for the sake of being together with Li Er. Furthermore, in the process of the groom's search, he had also strived his hardest to obtain her. If he were to lose in the end, then what would that mean? Would he be forced onto the path of no return? Seeing Qin Yu's expression, Jiang Lan repeatedly said, Okay, I'll personally go to the Sage Emperor's palace and have a proper chat with that big brother of mine. Is that enough? Only then did Qin Yu's heart calm down a bit. Thank you, Uncle Lan. I'll have to trouble Uncle Lan again. Qin Yu also felt a bit embarrassed in his heart. Merely, this matter was something that Qin Yu's heart would continue to be in suspense the entire time. Jiang Lan smiled. I'll go right away. Uncle Lan disappeared from the wood mansion. I hope that everything goes smoothly. Qin Yu was looking forward to it in his heart. Chapter 607. Sage Emperor's Palace. Inside Jiang Fan's study, the door to the study room was tightly closed. The windows were also tightly closed. The entire study room was dusky. Jiang Fan was quietly sitting in front of the study table by himself. Whoosh! Jiang Lan appeared in the spacious and empty area in front of the desk. Jiang Fan raised his head and took a glance at Jiang Lan. Jiang Fan's eyes were slightly dark red. His aura was also somewhat heavy. Jiang Lan frowned. Big brother, what are you thinking about? How did this happen? Jiang Lan also felt that something was wrong with Jiang Fan. Why would the Jiang Fan who was always confident and at ease become like this? Furthermore, now that Jiang Fan had obtained the betrothal gift, he ought to be flushed with success. Second brother, you've come. Jiang Fan said indifferently. Jiang Lan frowned and said, Big brother, that Qin Yu's betrothal gift should be that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure, right? He had already obtained 2 quotas. Furthermore, his betrothal gift was a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. There should be no doubt that he will win. What are you thinking? Without a doubt. Jiang Fan sneered. Second brother, your thinking is too simple. Oh, could it be that Zhou Xian's betrothal gift is even more precious than first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasures? Jiang Lan asked in confusion. Jiang Fan grew silent. Jiang Lan and Jiang Fan were blood brothers. Furthermore, they had been blood brothers since the birth of the divine realm. The two of them were extremely familiar with one another. Jiang Lan frowned and said, Big brother, what exactly is Zhou Xian's betrothal gift? Jiang Fan was still silent. Big brother. Jiang Lan was a bit angry. Don't ask anymore. Jiang Fan rolled his eyelids and coldly shouted. Jiang Lan frowned. However, he took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. Big brother, Qin Yu is the new craftsman god. If you allow him to win, not only will you be able to obtain that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure, you will also be able to make a craftsman god your son-in-law. From this, one can imagine that our utmost northern region's floating snow city status will be the highest among the 8 great sacred lands. So why are you hesitating now? Do not bother me. Let me think about it. Jiang Fan's low and deep voice sounded in the study room. Jiang Lan was furious. If this Jiang Fan were to tell him the reason, then he would be able to feel a bit better. However, at this moment, Jiang Fan refused to tell him the reason. Get out! Jiang Fan suddenly raised his head. He stared at Jiang Lan with a cold gaze. Jiang Lan forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. He humphed and then directly teleported away from the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace. Jiang Lan did not wish to confront Jiang Fan head-on. After all, the final decision of the groom's search was still in Jiang Fan's hands. Inside the Mu mansion, Qin Yu had been quietly waiting the entire time. He didn't even bother Jiang Li. Instead, he was quietly waiting by the side of the pond. In merely a short moment, Jiang Lan returned. Uncle Lan. Seeing Jiang Lan's expression, Qin Yu's heart jumped violently. The situation was not good. Jiang Lan slowly exhaled a mouthful of air. Only then did his expression gradually return to normal. He looked to Qin Yu and sighed. Little Yu, the situation is indeed as you had imagined. It's not good. What's going on? The utmost North Sage Emperor is going to choose Zhou Xian? Qin Yu grew anxious. No. Jiang Lan regained his calmness. I am very familiar with Jiang Fan. If he had already decided to give the chosen candidate spot to Zhou Xian, then he would have already done so. Otherwise, he wouldn't have looked like that. He's obviously still on the prowl. Still on the prowl. Qin Yu frowned. That's right. At this moment, Jiang Fan is also unable to make up his mind. I truly cannot imagine what was written on that Zhou clan's betrothal gift list that actually caused Jiang Fan to hesitate. Jiang Lan shook his head and said with a frown, You've obtained 2 chosen candidate spots, and your betrothal gift is a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. And now, you're the new craftsman god. All of this is actually unable to make my big brother decide to choose you. In that case, what exactly was written on Zhou Xian's betrothal gift list? Qin Yu also started to frown. It was not only Jiang Lan who was confused. Qin Yu was also confused. Qin Yu felt that he already possessed a sufficient amount of backing. There was simply no possibility for him to lose. However, the truth was, Zhou Xian's betrothal gift list had indeed caused Jiang Fan to hesitate. No matter what, I cannot lose. Qin Yu's gaze grew sharp. Uncle Lan. Qin Yu looked to Jiang Lan. At this moment, the utmost North Sage Emperor is still on the prowl. Would I be able to have him support me if I were to increase the stakes? Jiang Lan grew silent for a moment. Little Yu. Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu. Your stakes are already extremely high. First-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasures are extremely precious treasures. I reckon that even if you were to increase your treasures, it would not have much of an effect. Qin Yu immediately started to frown. Jiang Lan continued. However, Hearing this word, Qin Yu immediately pricked up his ears. It seemed that there was still hope. Jiang Lan, as the clan chief of the Jiang clan, the reason why he values first-rate grandmas spiritual treasures is so that his clan can become stronger. Since that's the case, we still have 2 more methods. What are those 2 methods? Qin Yu was unable to think of any methods. Jiang Lan smiled and said, the first method is to start from Jiang Fan and Li Er's relationship as father and daughter. Although Jiang Fan wanted Li Er to publicly search for a groom, it cannot be denied. Jiang Fan and Li Er still have feelings for one another. I will bring Li Er over and have Li Er directly tell him that the person that Li Er likes is you. I will have him help you too. His daughter's happiness ought to be able to affect him. Jiang Lan nodded. Qin Yu was also overjoyed. That's right. If he were Jiang Fan, he would indeed have to consider his daughter's wishes. The second method, Jiang Lan continued. Didn't Jiang Fan want the floating snow city to become stronger? It's very simple. You can directly tell him that you possess another soul tier of life. Qin Yu was startled. The fact that he possessed Lu Xing's soul tier was indeed a secret that very few people knew about. Jiang Lan continued. Li Er possesses a soul tier of life. You possess a soul tier of life. Once the 2 of you dual train and combine your comprehensions, it would be very easy for one of you to become a God King. Furthermore, the 2 soul tiers of life were formed from the peculiar energy within the God King of Life's body when she died. If the 2 soul tiers of life were to fuse, the energy of the God King of Life would once again appear. Regardless of who the 2 soul tiers of life were to be given to, it would be very possible for either of them to become the new God King of Life. When Jiang Lan said this, Qin Yu also came to some understanding. Lu Xing's soul tier was composed of 2 parts. One was the comprehension of the spatial laws. The other was the energy of the God King of Life. The energy of the God King of Life was extremely peculiar. It was even capable of restoring one's soul. If the 2 of you are to be together, it would be very possible for Li Er to become a God King. For his own daughter to become a God King, this ought to be very attractive to Jiang Fan. Jiang Lan said with a smile. Qin Yu nodded repeatedly. That's right, the 2 methods that Jiang Lan mentioned were both very feasible. If we were to use these 2 methods at the same time, the possibility of success would be even greater. Jiang Lan turned around and looked to the entrance of the courtyard. Li Er, you've been listening at the entrance for so long. Come in. Li Er? Qin Yu spread out his spatial energy. Sure enough, Jiang Li, whose eyes were slightly red, was standing behind the entrance of the courtyard. Earlier, when he was chatting with Uncle Lan, Qin Yu had been extremely nervous the entire time. He did not even notice that Jiang Li was outside the courtyard. Of course, this was also related to the fact that Qin Yu had removed his spatial energy. Big brother Qin Yu, what Uncle Lan said is correct. I will go with Uncle Lan. Jiang Li walked over and said resolutely. Qin Yu grew silent for a moment. He then nodded. I'll have to trouble you then. Qin Yu smiled apologetically to Jiang Li. Jiang Li immediately shook her head. After a short moment, Jiang Lan brought Jiang Li to the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace again. It was still that secluded and dark study room. It's been 102 quadrillion years. Are we going to continue like this? Jiang Fan muttered in a low voice. Suddenly, Jiang Fan raised his head. He saw that Jiang Li and Jiang Lan had both appeared in the center of the study room. Second brother, you've come again? Jiang Fan frowned. When he saw Jiang Li, Jiang Fan took a deep breath. Li Er, do you have any business with me? Jiang Li stared at her imperial father. She said resolutely, Imperial father, I wish for you to choose big brother Qin Yu. You wish? Jiang Fan frowned. That's right. Jiang Li nodded and said, Actually, big brother Qin Yu and I already knew each other in the mortal realm. He only managed to reach the divine realm because of me. You're saying that Qin Yu? Jiang Fan's eyes were filled with disbelief. You went to the mortal realm close to 20,000 years ago, right? That Qin Yu, how could his cultivation be this fast? That's right. If you do not believe me, you can ask Uncle Lan. In fact, you can even ask that Zhou Xian. Jiang Li said directly. Jiang Lan nodded and said, Big brother, that is indeed the case. Little Yu has been diligently cultivating the entire time. His cultivation speed was that fast, and he even became the craftsman god. It was all for the sake of marrying Li-Er. Thus, he was able to give the gauze feather blade to Big Brother without the slightest hesitation. He could also write that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure on his betrothal gift. Jiang Fan started to believe it. No wonder you were willing to part with 2 first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasures. Jiang Fan nodded. He then looked to Jiang Li with a frown. Li-Er, could it be that you think that your cousin Zhou Xian did not treat you well? Jiang Li shook her head and said, I will not marry anyone other than Big Brother Qin Yu. Jiang Fan was stunned. He then humphed. Scoundrel! Big Brother! Jiang Lan was also a bit angry. Big Brother, does Li-Er not have the right to choose her own marriage? I see that you've also become obsessed today. Exactly what sort of nonsense are you thinking about? Jiang Fan raised his head and glared at Jiang Lan. What, you want to fight? Jiang Lan sneered. Don't forget, you've also given me the gauze feather blade that Qin Yu gave you. With the gauze feather blade, it was indeed impossible for Jiang Fan to defeat Jiang Lan. Jiang Fan humphed coldly, and then said no more. After all, he already possessed a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. If he were to give the gauze feather blade to Jiang Lan, it would also allow the floating snow city to become even stronger. Jiang Fan, I'll tell you clearly today. That Qin Yu is the owner of the other soul tier of life that Mei left behind after she died. Jiang Lan coldly stared at Jiang Fan. Jiang Fan was startled. What did you say? Jiang Fan was stunned. Could it be that you've forgotten about it this quickly? Jiang Lan sneered. Back then, when you all joined hands to kill Mei, one of the 2 soul tiers of life that Mei left behind before she died entered Li-Er's body. If it wasn't for this reason, how many people would have participated in your groom search? Jiang Fan was stunned. Indeed, practically all of the people that participated in the groom search had participated because of this soul tier of life. Those 2 children are equivalent to my children. Jiang Fan, you must not be too heartless. A cold light flickered through Jiang Lan's eyes. Furthermore, once these 2 children get married and dual train, the 2 soul tiers of life would fuse together and easily give birth to a new God King of life. Little Yu had also said that he would give that soul tier of life to your daughter. If that's the case, then it's very possible for you to have a daughter that would become the God King of life. Jiang Lan continued. Furthermore, you would also have a son-in-law that would become the craftsman god. With Qin Yu here, it is without a doubt that the floating snow city would become the strongest among the 8 great sacred lands. In that case, I wish to ask you, at this point, why are you hesitating? Jiang Lan stared at Jiang Fan angrily. Jiang Fan's heavy breathing resounded through the study. Second brother, allow me to calm down, okay? Jiang Fan had admitted defeat. Jiang Lan heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. At the beginning, Jiang Fan's attitude had also caused Jiang Lan to be very worried. Jiang Fan's behavior meant that Jiang Fan had somewhat supported Zhou Xian. However, now that he had admitted defeat, it ought to be because his words earlier had affected Jiang Fan. Big brother, I hope that you will not make a decision that will disappoint everyone. You ought to know. What does Mei mean to me? What do these 2 children mean to me? Jiang Lan decided to pressure Jiang Fan once again. Jiang Fan slowly nodded. Second brother, I understand everything. Well then, you all can leave first. I need to calm down by myself. Good. In that case, I shall wait for the result that you will announce in a couple days. Jiang Lan said indifferently. After that, Jiang Lan held Li-Er's hand, and the 2 of them disappeared from the study. The study once again returned to its tranquility and duskiness. Only a long sigh could be heard. It would appear that I must make a decision. Jiang Fan flipped his hand. In his hand appeared the betrothal gift list that Zhou Xian had given him. The contents of that list caused Jiang Fan's heart to be unable to calm down. Chapter 608. There were only 2 items on the list of betrothal gifts. 1. Brother Jiang Fan, this time around, our Zhou clan's betrothal gift is merely a piece of information and a promise. On behalf of my son, I will first tell you a piece of information for free. Within 1,000 years, the exalted celestial mountain would descend once more. I presume that Brother Jiang Fan understands the meaning behind the descent of the exalted celestial mountain. 6 quadrillion years ago, the descent of the exalted celestial created the unfettered exalted celestial. However, this time around, who would become the exalted celestial? Every God King had a chance. 2. As for the promise, it is a promise personally made by my father, the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. Once Brother Jiang Fan allows my son, Zhou Xian, to become Jiang Li's husband, my father, the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial, promised Brother Jiang Fan that in the battle for the Exalted Celestial opportunity, my father would help you once. As for when to attack, it is up to Brother Jiang Fan to decide. Exalted Celestial Mountain, Jiang Fan sighed in a low voice. The bitter scene from 6 quadrillion years ago appeared in his mind. One God King after another, for the sake of becoming an exalted celestial, they had all risked their lives to fight for a bit of opportunity. One after another, God Kings fell one after another. Could it be that I have to give up on this opportunity? Jiang Fan's brows were twisted together. His eyes were filled with worry. Creak. The study's side door opened. Familiar footsteps sounded in the study. Jiang Fan slightly exhaled and said in a low voice, "Madam, you've come." The person who came was precisely Chunyu Ro, Jiang Fan's wife. "Husband, do not worry about it anymore. If you want to do it, then do it. I support you." Chunyu Ro gently stroked Jiang Fan's long hair and said with a soft voice. Before his wife, Jiang Fan was completely unguarded against what he was thinking. "Madam, it's been 120 quadrillion years. For such a long time, I've always been the Holy Emperor of the North Pole. I will forever be the utmost North Sage Emperor. However, I have truly had enough of this sort of life. I truly wish to become an exalted celestial, a supreme exalted celestial." Jiang Fan slowly said, although the position of Sage Emperor was revered. However, when a person had been the Sage Emperor from the very start, and had been in that position for a full 12 quadrillion years, he would not find the position of Sage Emperor to be anything special. Instead, he was looking forward to an even higher position, Celestial Venerable. Last time when the exalted celestial mountain descended, although I tried my best, at the final moment, the floating feathers exalted celestial secretly acted. All of us 8 great sage emperors were defeated, and actually became the unfettered exalted celestial. Jiang Fan shook his head and lightly smiled. The exalted celestial mountain is about to descend again. I am truly looking forward to it. Chunyu Ro picked up a golden scroll from the table. This was Qin Yu's betrothal gift list. First-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure. This Qin Yu is indeed no ordinary character, Chunyu Ro praised. Jiang Fan glanced at the golden scroll. He nodded and said with a light smile, "Had it not been for the descent of the exalted celestial mountain, I would definitely have chosen Qin Yu as my son-in-law." But, Jiang Fan shook his head. "Although first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasures are precious, I already possess a clan protection spiritual treasure. The clan guardian spiritual treasure appeared when the deity world was born. Furthermore, it has fused with the bloodline of the Jiang clan, making it even more powerful. Even if I were to obtain a first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure, I would either give it to my second brother or Jiang Xing. I don't need it myself." Jiang Fan indeed did not need it. As for the gauze feather blade that Qin Yu offered, Jiang Fan gave it to his second brother Jiang Lan. Even if he were to obtain another first-rate Grand Miss Spiritual Treasure, he would still give it to the third God King of the Floating Snow City. All of this would only cause the strength of the Floating Snow City to increase greatly. As for Jiang Fan himself, it would not affect him too much. All these years, I have always been thinking for the sake of my clan. However now, I should also think for myself. Exalted Celestial, it is truly something that one yearns for. Jiang Fan had a trace of hope in his eyes. Exalted Celestial, the Supreme Exalted Celestial. Before the Exalted Celestials, God Kings could only be considered as minor characters. Only the Exalted Celestials possessed the supreme status. "Husband, I am worried about a matter." Chunyuro said in a soft voice. Jiang Fan turned around to look at his wife. Jiang Fan had never doubted the feelings between him and his wife. The two of them had helped each other in difficult times for hundreds of millions of years. The depth of their feelings was already something that did not need to be described with words. This thunder punishment exalted celestial said that he would help you once. However, if he were to help others after helping you, what would we do then? Chunyuro said worriedly. She was truly worried for her husband. Jiang Fan slightly frowned. Regarding this, I have also been doubtful the entire time. However, last time when the exalted celestial mountain descended, the exalted celestials did not help at all. Only at the very end did the floating feathers exalted celestials secretly help and change the situation, allowing the unfettered God King to become the final victor and become an exalted celestial. Jiang Fan's brows were congealed. Merely, would the exalted celestials help multiple times this time around? Chunyuro was also quietly accompanying Jiang Fan. Jiang Fan and Chunyuro were quietly chatting together. Chunyuro knew very well what Jiang Fan was thinking. Thus, she naturally did not have any misgivings when chatting with him. After about half a day, Jiang Fan raised his head and looked toward the center of the study room. A person suddenly appeared in the center of the study room. The Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou. Brother-in-law, why have you come? Chunyuro said with a light smile. Zhou had a smile on his face. He directly said, Little Ro, I have come because I wish to personally explain some things to Jiang Fan. After all, I have only briefly mentioned the betrothal gifts list. I am worried that brother Jiang Fan might not know about it. Jiang Fan raised his head and took a glance at Zhou. Zhou, I do indeed have some doubts in my heart. I wish to ask you, exalted celestials, after the descent of the exalted celestial mountain, are they able to act as they wish? Of course not. Zhou directly said. If they were able to act directly, then why didn't my father act last time? Jiang Fan slightly nodded. Last time, when they were fighting over the opportunity to become an exalted celestial, the thunder punishment exalted celestial did not act at all. However, the floating feathers exalted celestial acted in the end. Can you tell me the reason? Jiang Fan asked. Zhou nodded and said, Brother Jiang Fan, this is something that I have only found out about not long ago. My father told me, last time, when the exalted celestial mountain descended, the reason why he did not act was because the floating feathers exalted celestial had stopped him. Floating feathers exalted celestial? Jiang Fan's heart slightly jumped. The floating feathers exalted celestial was able to stop the thunder punishment exalted celestial. Merely from this, one could tell that although the floating feathers exalted celestial and the thunder punishment exalted celestial were both exalted celestials, there was still a difference between their statuses. Last time, in order to pursue balance, the floating feathers exalted celestial gave the opportunity to become an exalted celestial to an ascender God King. And this time, the floating feathers exalted celestial had already told my father that this time, the floating feathers exalted celestial would not act. As for my father, the thunder punishment exalted celestial, he possessed a single opportunity to act. Zhou looked straight at Jiang Fan. Jiang Fan's eyes shined. The thunder punishment exalted celestial actually only possessed a single opportunity to act. Furthermore, this Zhou clan was actually giving this opportunity to him? This betrothal gift was indeed something that Jiang Fan was unable to not be tempted by. Brother Zhou, is what you said the truth? Jiang Fan asked. You're still worried that I'm lying? Zhou lightly laughed. Brother Jiang Fan merely needs to carefully consider it. If you are able to have the exalted celestial act a couple more times, then there would be no suspense in the competition for the opportunity to become an exalted celestial. Jiang Fan also nodded. Indeed, if the thunder punishment exalted celestial were to only act once to help him, then it could only mean that he, Jiang Fan, possessed a 30% chance of becoming an exalted celestial. However, if the thunder punishment exalted celestial were to act a couple more times, then wouldn't the thunder punishment exalted celestial have the final say as to who would become an exalted celestial? It is impossible for the floating feathers exalted celestial to allow such a thing to happen. Zhou Hua lightly laughed. In that case, why don't you want to use this opportunity to help yourself? Jiang Fan looked to Zhou Hua. Zhou Hua lightly laughed. Jiang Fan, I am different from you. Currently, our Zhou clan has transcended worldly affairs. Behind us is my father, the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial. I am able to enjoy this tranquil life as much as I want. As for becoming an exalted celestial, I do not have the extravagant hope. Furthermore, the floating feathers exalted celestial would not allow two exalted celestials to appear in the Zhou clan. Jiang Fan also slightly nodded. Of the three great exalted celestials, the one who possessed the true authority to decide was still the floating feathers exalted celestial. I'll give my father's only opportunity to act to you. Brother Jiang Fan ought to know who to choose during the groom search, right? Zhou Hua lightly smiled and said. Jiang Fan slightly frowned. He recalled the words of his second brother Jiang Lan. If he were to choose Zhou Xian, he feared that it would cause his relationship with his second brother to truly become stiff. Furthermore, his relationship with his daughter Jiang Li would also be affected. Forget about it. Ever since that Zhou Qiumei died, my second brother has never had a good relationship with me. As for Li Er, forget about it. Jiang Fan sighed in his heart. He had several children. He could not afford to lose this once-in-a-million opportunity for the sake of his daughter. Brother Zhou Hua, I know what to choose. You can return now. Jiang Fan said indifferently. Zhou Hua looked to Jiang Fan. He wanted to see through Jiang Fan's expression what Jiang Fan's choice would be. However, he was unable to. He could only lightly laugh. In that case, I shall wait for Brother Jiang Fan's choice. After that, Zhou Hua disappeared from the study. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. All of the palace masters of the floating snow city, the descendants of the imperial clan, the large captains of the heavenly deity army, a group of people had gathered in the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace. The utmost North Sage Emperor's palace was extremely noisy. Everyone was also extremely enthusiastic. Qin Yu sat to the side. He was truly unable to smile. At this moment, Qin Yu was extremely vexed. Especially after he obtained the news from Uncle Lan. It was clear that his chances of success this time around were only 50%. Brother Qin Yu. Qin Yu raised his head and looked over. He saw Kuei Ho walking over with a smile on his face while holding his cup. Brother Qin Yu, what's wrong? Could it be that you're vexed? You've obtained 2 chosen candidate spots. I believe it shouldn't be a problem for you to win. I'll be counting on your auspicious words. Qin Yu squeezed out a smile. Oh, that's right. Brother Qin Yu, what is your betrothal gift? If that Zhou Xian's betrothal gift is better than yours, then he still has a chance to win. Kuei Ho asked. Betrothal gift? Qin Yu lightly smiled and said. Is it that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure that I crafted? That Grand Miss spiritual treasure that caused the red clouds to cover the sky, and the spiritual treasure lightning to descend? Seeing Qin Yu's reaction, Kuei Ho immediately laughed and patted Qin Yu's shoulder. Brother Qin Yu, you can rest assured. With how exceptional your betrothal gift is, no matter what, you'll definitely win. Qin Yu suddenly looked behind Kuei Ho. Kuei Ho also looked behind him. It turned out that Zhou Xian had arrived. Zhou Xian also had a trace of worry in his eyes. However, he also had a fake smile on his face. After dealing with some acquaintances, he returned to his seat and sat down. The situation is bad. Qin Yu frowned. If Zhou Xian did not have the slightest hope of winning, then Zhou Xian ought to be free and at ease, or have a gloomy expression. She didn't look so distressed now. Right when Qin Yu was pondering, suddenly, the entire palace hall grew quiet. Qin Yu also turned around to look. He saw that the Northwest Sage Emperor Jiang Fan and his wife had brought Jiang Li into the Sage Emperor's palace. The other god kings also walked in after them. Jiang Fan had a smile on his face. He smiled and nodded to the people surrounding him. The 13 god kings all took their seats. This time around, Jiang Li sat beside Jiang Fan and Chun Yu Rou. She was even holding hands with Chun Yu Rou. Li Er. Qin Yu exhaled a mouthful of air. He was trying his best to calm himself down. Jiangli also took a glance at Qinyu. The affection contained within her eyes was something that Qinyu was able to clearly sense. After the God Kings finished exchanging greetings with one another, everyone sat back down. Brother Jiang, there's no need to waste time. You can directly announce who exactly you've chosen as your son-in-law. The Blood Demon Queen said in a low voice. Jiang Fan smiled and nodded. I will also not waste time. Everyone below were holding their breaths. Zhou Xian's gaze was firmly fixed on Jiang Fan. As for Qinyu, he was also holding his breath. All of his attention was focused on Jiang Fan. Jiang Fan looked to everyone. He smiled and said, This groom search has lasted close to 30 years. In the process, Duanmu had even become a god king. Qin Yu and Zhou Xian had also both obtained bestowments from the exalted celestials. Qin Yu had even managed to craft a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. All of these are extremely joyous matters. I am also extremely honored that all of these happened in the process of the groom search. There are two candidates, Qin Yu and Zhou Xian. Both of them are extremely outstanding. However, in the end, only a single person became my son-in-law. I hope that the person who failed would not mind it too much. Jiang Fan lightly smiled to Zhou Xian and Qin Yu. Qin Yu felt that his heartbeat had already reached a frightening level. This Jiang Fan was still not announcing the name list. This sort of feeling was truly extremely anxious. However, Qin Yu could only endure it. After careful consideration, I have finally decided on the final candidate for my son-in-law. He is. Jiang Fan's face was brimming with a joyous smile. Everyone below was quiet. The various god kings above were also carefully listening. Jiangli stared at her father. As for Qin Yu, at this moment, he felt that the flow of time was truly very slow. It was so slow that he was about to go crazy. He is Zhou Xian from the Northwest Thunder Punishment City, Jiang Fan said with a loud laugh. Me. Zhou Xian appeared to have been stunned by the sudden pleasant surprise. He was stunned for a moment. Then his face was filled with ecstasy. At this moment, Jiang Li was looking at her imperial father with disbelief. Zhou Xian? It's Zhou Xian? At this moment, Qin Yu felt that he was the only person left in the entire world. Jiang Fan's final sentence was still resounding in his ears. That's right, it was a sentence. He had sentenced him and Li heir to death. No, imperial father, you cannot. Jiang Li suddenly spoke. Jiang Fan turned around and coldly glanced at Jiang Li. No matter how Jiang Li opened her mouth, no sound came out. At this moment, Qin Yu was abruptly woken up. Qin Yu's facial muscles were twitching. His chest was like a bellows. Qin Yu's gaze was firmly fixed on Jiang Fan above. You chose Zhou Xian? Jiang Fan displayed a smile to Qin Yu. Qin Yu, don't mind it too much. This, don't mind it too much? Qin Yu truly wanted to sneer. For the sake of this day, he had worked extremely hard. For the sake of finding a groom, Qin Yu had worked extremely hard to research artifact crafting. He had spent several million years. For the sake of openly marrying Li heir, the gauze feather blade, the purple mystic mansion, all sorts of spiritual treasures, Qin Yu did not care about any of them. However, now, this Jiang Fan was still trying to console him and tell him not to mind it? How could he not mind it? Shut up! Qin Yu suddenly shouted. This caused Jiang Fan to be slightly startled. Soon after, his expression turned ugly. However, at this moment, all of the god kings were looking at Qin Yu in shock. At this moment, Qin Yu's aura had suddenly turned wild and fierce. He had a trace of coldness on his face. He coldly glanced at Jiang Fan and Zhou Hua. It is you two who forced me. Qin Yu looked to Jiang Li. Jiang Li also looked to Qin Yu. The two of them stared at each other. Merely through their gazes, the two of them understood what the other was thinking. Jiang Li had a smile on her face. Qin Yu also had a pampering smile on his face. Li heir, no one is capable of breaking me apart. Absolutely not. Qin Yu said in a low voice. Qin Yu, what are you planning to do? Jiang Fan shouted angrily. He had already sensed that the atmosphere was amiss. Haha, what am I planning to do? You're asking me what I'm planning to do? Haha, what do you think I'm planning to do? Qin Yu's voice resounded through the entire palace hall. The smile on his face was extremely cold. His eyes even contained a trace of madness. Chapter 609. Above the utmost North Sage Emperor's palace, the various god kings were watching the scene before them with interest. All because of a woman. This new craftsman god Qinyu, who had rapidly risen in power in the divine realm, had actually lost his composure and started arguing with the god kings. This was truly interesting. Although Qinyu's strength was pretty good, he was still not a god king. In the eyes of the various god kings, no matter how powerful a high-level heavenly deity was, they would not be able to injure a god king in the slightest. Being inferior to a god king, he was merely a small ant. How could he possibly be able to move a large tree? Truly overestimating your capabilities. Zhou Xian, who was joyous and complacent, shot a glance at Qinyu. Within his eyes was a trace of disdain. To be this arrogant before the utmost North Sage Emperor. Oh, before my lord father-in-law. You're truly seeking trouble for yourself. However, at this moment, Jiang Fan's expression was rather serious. That was because, Big Brother, you still disregarded Li Er's own wishes, disregarded my warning and still chose Zhou Xian. Jiang Lan's voice resounded in Jiang Fan's mind. 70% of Jiang Fan's attention was on Jiang Lan. 20% of his attention was on Qinyu. However, on the surface, Jiang Fan was coldly looking at Qinyu. Qinyu, I am able to understand your frame of mind. Merely, this groom's search is being conducted fairly under the observation of the various god kings. You must accept this result. Jiang Fan said coldly. Qinyu stared into Jiang Fan's eyes and smiled. Fair. Qinyu glanced at the various god kings above. God kings in this groom's search, I Qinyu have all seen my performance. Of the 3 chosen candidate spots, I have obtained 2. And that Zhou Xian has only obtained 1. Furthermore, my betrothal gift is that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. I truly wish to know, in this sort of situation, how is it fair for you to still choose Zhou Xian? First-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure? The god kings above immediately started to discuss with each other. Jiang Fan, could it be that the Zhou clan's betrothal gift is an exalted celestial spiritual treasure? Otherwise, why would you choose Zhou Xian? We are also unable to understand. The Blood Demon Queen said eccentrically. The other god kings all looked to Qinyu with skeptical gazes. Indeed, Qinyu already possessed 2 chosen candidate spots. On top of that, his betrothal gift was a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. How could he lose in such a situation? Jiang Fan's expression immediately sunk. Zhou Hua stood up. He took a glance at Qinyu, and then said in a clear voice. Everyone, do you all remember that Brother Jiang Fan had said that as long as the betrothal gift was able to surprise and excite him, the more he liked it, the better it would be. To Brother Jiang Fan, the betrothal gift that our Zhou clan has given to the Jiang clan is indeed more precious than a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. Jiang Fan also nodded and said, I dare guarantee that to me, this betrothal gift is indeed much more important than that first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. Therefore, it is extremely fair that I choose Zhou Xian. With the 2 sage emperors saying this at the same time, the other god kings began to believe them. After all, the most important thing for a person was their face. None of them would believe that the 2 sage emperors would make empty promises. Extremely fair? Qinyu smiled. He actually started to walk up the flight of steps. Step by step, he slowly walked toward the top of the palace hall. How come I am unable to see any fairness? Jiang Fan, His Majesty Utmost North Sage Emperor. Why don't you tell me what that betrothal gift is? As Qinyu said that, he continued to walk up the flight of steps toward the top of the palace hall. Zhou Hua coldly shouted. Impudent. Qinyu, this is not a place where you can act arrogantly. Quickly step back. Hearing those words, Qinyu sneered and glanced at Zhou Hua with disdain. I am speaking with the utmost North Sage Emperor. Why are you interrupting? Zhou Hua was startled. Everyone in the palace hall was startled. In a short moment, Zhou Hua's complexion had turned deep red. It was so red that blood was about to drip from it. In the past 12 quadrillion years, who dared to speak to the Northwest Sage Emperor in such a manner? Qinyu Yu? Zhou Hua was about to attack Jiang Fan. Brother Zhou Hua. Jiang Lan spoke coldly. Don't be anxious. Qinyu's disrespect toward you can be dealt with later. Right now, I am also very skeptical of the fairness of this groom search. I also wish to know exactly what was written on the list of betrothal gifts from your Zhou clan. Jiang Lan's indifferent yet ice-cold voice resounded through the palace hall. The other god kings were all shocked. Jiang Lan was Jiang Fan's second brother. Why would he tear down Jiang Fan's stage at such a time? Qin Yu and Jiang Lan instantly glanced at each other. Soon after, they separated. The two of them both knew what the other was thinking. Qin Yu glanced at Jiang Fan. He then looked to Jiang Li beside him. Jiang Fan's wife, Chun Yuro, was coldly looking at Qin Yu. It was as if she wanted to use her gaze to obstruct Qin Yu. Li I am sorry, Qin Yu said softly. Jiang Li lightly shook her head. She understood the meaning behind Qin Yu's apology. Qin Yu had apologized because he did not fulfill the promise from back then to allow her, Jiang Li, to marry Qin Yu openly. Now it would appear that the promise from back then would no longer be fulfilled. Let's go. Qin Yu lightly smiled. When everyone heard Qin Yu's words, they were all baffled. At this moment, Jiang Li was behind Jiang Fan. There were also many god kings in the surroundings. Could it be that in this sort of situation, Qin Yu would still be able to snatch her away? Qin Yu, even if there are god kings helping you today, you can still forget about snatching away my daughter. Jiang Fan said with an indifferent smile. At this moment, the space surrounding Jiang Li had been sealed. For other god kings, it would be impossible for them to use the divine realm's spatial energy to bring someone away. Qin Yu did not even bother to glance at Jiang Fan. He had merely treated Jiang Fan as heir. His gaze was completely focused on Jiang Li. Faced with Qin Yu's question, Jiang Li nodded. From today on, we will never be separated again, Qin Yu said with a smile. The spatial energy of the new cosmos had already covered an area of several hundred miles. Naturally, this sage emperor's palace was also covered by it. With an intention from Qin Yu, Jiang Li, who was originally behind Jiang Fan, disappeared into thin air. Disappeared. Before the eyes of the 13 god kings, in the utmost north sage emperor's palace, before the gazes of all the heavenly deities, Jiang Li disappeared. Just like that, Jiang Li disappeared. Where's Li Er? Jiang Fan was completely stunned. This scene was truly too shocking. The other god kings were also baffled. Jiang Fan was extremely certain that he had completely sealed the space surrounding Jiang Li. Even god king level experts would not be able to use the divine realm's spatial energy to bring away Li Er. However, the spatial energy that Qin Yu used was not from the divine realm. Instead, it originated from the new cosmos that Qin Yu had created. The spatial energy of the new cosmos was something that even god kings were unable to investigate. Qin Yu, return my wife to me, Zhou Xian suddenly shouted. Wife? Qin Yu's gaze turned cold. He turned around and coldly looked at Zhou Xian. He was about to attack. However, at this moment, Qin Yu discovered that both Zhou Hua and Qin Yu were about to attack him at the same time. Being covered by the spatial energy, Qin Yu's reaction was astonishingly fast. Off, before everyone's gaze, Qin Yu casually took a step toward Zhou Xian below the great palace hall. His gaze was also on Zhou Xian. It was as if he did not notice the two god kings behind him. The various heavenly deities below started to worry for Qin Yu. However, what happened next left everyone dumbfounded. A person actually appeared from Qin Yu's body. It was another Qin Yu, the cyan gown Qin Yu. The black gown Qin Yu charged toward Zhou Xian below. As for the cyan gown Qin Yu, he was smiling as he faced the two god kings. Body clone technique? Jiang Fan and Zhou Hua were both startled. However, they still continued to attack Qin Yu with calm expressions. Jiang Fan's palm strike seemed to have encompassed the entire world. It caused one to be unable to dodge it. As for Zhou Hua, he turned into a ray of lightning and hacked toward Qin Yu. The joint attack of two god kings. The situation was extremely bad. Big brother. A voice sounded in Jiang Fan's mind. At the same time, Jiang Lan appeared before Jiang Fan. He struck out a fist with one hand and collided with Jiang Fan's palm strike. The space started to tremble intensely. At the location where the fist and palm collided, the space completely collapsed. Second brother. Jiang Fan glared at Jiang Lan. However, Jiang Lan responded with a cold smile. Not good. At this moment, Shen Tefan and Queen Ho who were below started to worry for Qin Yu. Although Jiang Lan was able to block one person, he was unable to block the second person. The Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua had already turned into a ray of lightning and hacked down. Do not harm my son. A divine awareness voice transmission sounded in Qin Yu's mind. Your son is dead for sure. The Cyan Gown Qin Yu suddenly punched out a fist toward the ray of lightning, fighting against the Northwest Sage Emperor head-on. The various god kings above all felt this to be ridiculous. Could it be that this clone of Qin Yu's was trying to throw away his life? Bang! The fist ruthlessly collided with the ray of lightning. Whoosh! Like a floating picture, the surrounding space actually started to tremble and tear apart. Even though the ground of the Sage Emperor's palace was protected by a powerful barrier, it still collapsed with a loud bang. The ground had completely cracked open. The entire space of the Sage Emperor's palace started to tremble. The pillars of the Sage Emperor's palace also started to collapse. Those heavenly deities hurriedly retreated. Fortunately, this Sage Emperor's palace contained a powerful barrier to begin with. Its restrictive power was extremely strong. Otherwise, merely this collision would be enough to cause the space within several miles to collapse and tear apart. What a hard fist! Zhou Hua was shocked. The Cyan Gown Qin Yu was formed by the fusion of the 9-petaled flower lotus's lotus core and that golden bead. His true form was a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. How could the hardness of a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure be fake? However, Zhou Hua still had a trace of a smile on his face. How could the remarkable ability of a god king be a joke? The most powerful ability of a god king was the ability to control space. The space surrounding the Cyan Gown Qin Yu suddenly collapsed. The Cyan Gown Qin Yu was immediately sucked into the spatial crack. What a terrifying devouring power. After being sucked into the spatial crack, the Cyan Gown Qin Yu couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. In the blink of an eye, the space returned to normal. As for the Cyan Gown Qin Yu, he was exiled into the spatial crack. Humph! Zhou Hua had an indifferent smile on his face. However, Zhou Hua didn't know that Qin Yu's clone had merely been sucked into the spatial crack for a short while before returning to the new cosmos with a teleportation. While Zhou Hua was fighting against the Cyan Gown Qin Yu himself was charging towards Zhou Xian. However, the spatial attack that Zhou Hua had used earlier was not only aimed at Qin Yu's clone. At the same time, it was also aimed at Qin Yu's actual body. Amen. Qin Yu felt that the space surrounding him was about to collapse. Freeze! A spear suddenly appeared in Qin Yu's hand. It was the divine spear Waning Snow. The dark and yellow energy began to revolve around the divine spear Waning Snow. The collapsing space was actually frozen. The dark and yellow energy possessed a special effect. It was to freeze the 5 elements and stabilize the cosmic space. Pooh! Just like that, the divine spear Waning Snow was thrust forth. That Zhou Xian saw Qin Yu charging toward him. Disdain filled his eyes. He thought in his heart, Qin Yu, you're merely a high-level heavenly deity. You want to kill me without using any formation techniques? In your dreams. With a flip of his hand, a long whip flickering with lightning appeared in Zhou Xian's hand. He ruthlessly lashed it toward Qin Yu's spear. Zhou Xian didn't know that Qin Yu had already received the spatial destruction attack earlier. To be able to easily take care of the spatial destruction, how could Zhou Xian possibly compare with Qin Yu's strength? Whoosh! Bang! Zhou Xian's long whip flickering with lightning actually attempted to coil around Qin Yu's divine spear Waning Snow. The divine spear Waning Snow merely trembled for a moment before the long whip was shattered into over a dozen pieces. No. Due to the fact that the spatial destruction did not work, Zhou Hua was still in a state of shock. Seeing how frightening Qin Yu's spear was, Zhou Hua was immediately frightened. Zhou Xian himself was also stunned. The second-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure, Lightning Whip, was actually broken just like that. What sort of level was the weapon in Qin Yu's hand? Could it be another first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure? Unfortunately, Zhou Xian didn't know that the divine spear Waning Snow was even more frightening than a first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasure. Although it was slow to describe, The speed at which Qin Yu attacked with his spear did not allow others to think too much about it. The various god kings above were merely stunned for a moment before Qin Yu's spear arrived at Zhou Xian's body. Bang! The spear attack landed on Zhou Xian's body. Like a sandbag, Zhou Xian was rapidly sent flying. Then, he ruthlessly smashed into the wall of the Sage Emperor's palace. Blood sprayed all over the wall. Strange, he actually didn't die? Qin Yu discovered something strange. Qin Yu impudent. The Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua flipped his hand and took out a dark black hammer. The Southwest Sage Emperor also flipped his hand and took out a thin aqua blue sword. As for the utmost South Sage Emperor, he flipped his hand and took out a white spear. 3 great Sage Emperors, 3 clan protection spiritual treasures? Qin Yu immediately laughed. Not to mention 3. Even if a Sage Emperor were to attack with his full strength, Qin Yu would not be able to withstand it. With the 3 of them attacking with their full strength, he would be courting death if he didn't leave. You want to kill me? Dream on. Qin Yu suddenly laughed out loud. Consider yourself lucky. Qin Yu sneered as he glanced at Zhou Xian, who had already stood up. Then he disappeared from the palace hall. Chapter 610. When Qin Yu teleported and disappeared, Uncle Fu and them who had been waiting outside the palace for Qin Yu the entire time were also absorbed into Qin Yu's new cosmos. Whoosh! Qin Yu teleported to the main street of the utmost northern region's floating snow city. Fei Xiaohei, let's go. Qin Yu's divine awareness voice transmission directly sounded in Hou Fei and Kuro's minds. This time around, Hou Fei and Kuro did not go to the Sage Emperor's palace. That was because Qin Yu had already made other preparations. If that Qin Yu truly did not choose him, then Qin Yu could only choose to elope with Li Air. Motherfucker, that ingrate Jiang Fan. Once Hou Fei heard Qin Yu's divine awareness voice transmission, he immediately cursed out in anger. Soon after, he was absorbed into his new cosmos. The floating cloud mansion's brothers Fei, Xiaohei, Qiuzhongfu and a group of heavenly deity servants were also absorbed into Qin Yu's new cosmos. With a lightning-like teleportation, Qin Yu teleported out of the floating snow city. Qin Yu had already left the floating snow city. Each time Qin Yu teleported, he would only travel several hundred miles. After teleporting out of the floating snow city twice, he disappeared from this world. Even if the God Kings were to search with all their might, it would still be impossible for them to find Qin Yu. Want to kill me? In your dreams. Qin Yu had already disappeared. However, his loud laughter was still echoing through the Sage Emperor's palace. When the Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua, the utmost North Sage Emperor Jiang Fan, and the other Sage Emperors saw that Qin Yu had suddenly disappeared, they were all startled. Teleportation? How could Qin Yu possibly know how to teleport? In merely an instant, these Sage Emperors reacted quickly. At practically the same time, they spread out their divine awareness and covered the entire divine realm. However, how fast was Qin Yu's teleportation speed? The 2 teleportations took merely a blink of an eye. By the time the several Sage Emperors managed to react, Qin Yu had already disappeared from this world. Even Qin Yu's troops from the floating cloud mansion had all disappeared. Impossible. Zhou Hua let out a low roar. His divine sense frantically and carefully searched the entire god realm, covering the boundless ocean and searching every island. But he still couldn't find Qin Yu's aura. The entire hall fell into a terrifying silence. The Empyrean gods below were all scared silly. What happened just now? That Qin Yu actually dared to look down on the utmost North Sage Emperor and the Northwest Sage Emperor. He even brazenly wanted to kill Zhou Xian in the Sage Emperor's palace. Furthermore, Qin Yu had teleported away. Are we dreaming? A mid-level heavenly deity below the Sage Emperor's palace said in a low voice. However, within the Sage Emperor's palace, the pillars had collapsed, the ground had cracked and the blood that Zhou Xian had vomited on the wall had all proven that what happened earlier was real. All of you return first. Jiang Fan said coldly. Those heavenly deities hurriedly left. These heavenly deities knew that, this time around, that Qin Yu had truly pierced through the heavens. There were only 15 people in the Sage Emperor's palace. 13 God Kings, Chunyu Ro and Zhou Xian. At this moment, Zhou Xian's complexion was still extremely pale. His eyes contained fear. Imperial Father. Zhou Xian stood beside Zhou Hua. It's gone. Zhou Hua asked. It's gone. Zhou Xian nodded and said. At this moment, Zhou Xian was extremely confused. Imperial Father, why is that Qin Yu's attack so powerful? Zhou Hua lightly shook his head. His eyes were also filled with confusion. Actually, I also want to know. Zhou Hua said in his heart. Zhou Hua still remembered the time when Zhou Xian was born. The time when his father, the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial, gave him that gift. Zhou Hua. This jade pendant is a little toy that I created by gathering precious materials and spending 100 years of time. Have Xianer drip his blood on it and recognize it as its master. This jade pendant will be able to protect him. As for its defensive power, this jade pendant is capable of defending against the attacks of ordinary God Kings several times. Even if you were to use your clan protection spiritual treasure to attack, this jade pendant would only be able to defend against one attack before shattering. His father's words were still in his ears. However, this Qin Yu was only a high-level heavenly deity. Yet, he actually managed to shatter the jade pendant that the Thunder Punishment Exalted Celestial had personally given him by using his spear. Exactly how powerful is this Qin Yu? That spear is most definitely a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. Why didn't I discover any sign of the birth of a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure? Zhou Hua also felt how mysterious Qin Yu was. In his heart, Zhou Hua had only thought that spear to be a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. As for whether or not Qin Yu's spear might be an exalted celestial spiritual treasure, this was something that Zhou Xian did not even dare to think about. After all, even the exalted celestials would only be bestowed a single exalted celestial spiritual treasure by the world upon becoming an exalted celestial. Wow! It seems that everyone has underestimated this Qin Yu. That blood demon queen ridiculed from the side. She was happy to watch the sage emperor being humiliated. The way I see it, there ought to be a God King level expert behind that Qin Yu. Otherwise, how could Qin Yu possibly teleport away from the Sage Emperor's palace? The utmost South Sage Emperor said with a frown. Brother Jiangfan, what do you think? Earlier, I reckoned that Jiangli was also taken away by that hidden God King level expert. Jiangfan muttered to himself. He knew very well what the actual situation was. He had actually used spatial confinement on Jiangli. It was impossible for others to take Jiangli away. However, Jiangli was still taken away. No matter what, Jiangfan was unable to understand it. After all, in order to teleport, one must use spatial energy. Even if an exalted celestial were to come, they would still have to use the divine realm's spatial energy. If one did not use the divine realm's spatial energy, how could one teleport someone? He was unable to understand it. Could it be that I made a mistake when I set up the spatial confinement earlier? Jiangfan started to doubt himself. After all, it was absolutely impossible for one to teleport without using spatial energy. This was common knowledge. Unfortunately, Jiangfan had never imagined that Qin Yu had used the spatial energy of another cosmos. This Qin Yu was able to teleport and take away Li Er. It ought to be because he possesses a God King behind him. Jiangfan nodded and said. He then sneered. No matter what, we must definitely find Li Er. Brother Jiangfan, why didn't you set up a spatial confinement around Li Er? If you did that, wouldn't it be impossible for Jiangli to be taken away? Immediately a God King said. Jiangfan smiled bitterly in his heart. I merely did not expect for there to be a hidden God King level expert behind him. Jiangfan smiled embarrassedly. This was the only thing that he could say. After all, this was better than saying that he had set up a spatial confinement, but made a mistake. For a God King that controlled the spatial laws to make a mistake in setting up a spatial confinement, this was definitely an enormous joke. That Qin Yu is truly powerful. Zhou Xian's whip ought to be a Grand Miss spiritual treasure, right? It was actually broken apart so easily. It would appear that the spear in Qin Yu's hand ought to be a first-rate Grand Miss spiritual treasure. This Qin Yu is truly powerful. I truly wonder how many first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures he possesses. The Blood Demon Queen said frivolously. Wasn't that the case? Qin Yu had already publicly announced that he possessed 3 first-rate Grand Mist spiritual treasures. One was the gauze feather blade. It was given to Jiang Fan. One was a scepter. The other was the spear that they saw earlier. Jiang Fan, I see that you've chosen the wrong son-in-law. The Blood Demon Queen ridiculed. Yu Cha, stop ridiculing me. Jiang Fan frowned and said. The Blood Demon Queen lightly laughed a couple times. She then stood to the side and said no more. Everyone, let's not talk about other matters anymore. Zhou Hua's expression was ugly. This Qin Yu has no respect for his elders. He openly provoked the Sage Emperor and brazenly attacked to kill my son Zhou Xian. Everyone has also seen that. Furthermore, this Qin Yu even openly snatched away my Zhou clan's daughter-in-law Jiang Li. Zhou Hua's eyes were flickering with coldness. This groom's search was judged by everyone. For him to do such a thing, it was clear that he did not place anyone in his eyes. I propose that the 11 of us chase after and kill this Qin Yu together. Sai, don't mention the 11 of us. The Blood Demon Queen Yu Cha spoke again. If you all wish to chase after that Qin Yu, do not drag our Mount Blood Demon into it. Seeing that Yu Cha spoke, Zhou Hua started to frown. Zhou Hua felt that this Blood Demon Queen was truly too loathsome. However, due to her status as the Blood Demon Queen, Zhou Hua was unable to say anything. The Azura God King Luo Fan lightly smiled and said, Qin Yu is an ascender. He could be considered to be a part of our ascender powers. You want us to chase after and kill Qin Yu? In your dreams. Everyone, if you all wish to chase after and kill Qin Yu, then I shall not accompany you all. Farewell. Luo Fan waved his sleeve. Without caring about the reaction of the others, he directly used earth shrinking and left the Sage Emperor's palace. The Dual Domain Island's Misty God King also stood up. He lightly smiled and then left the Sage Emperor's palace. As for the Blood Demon Queen, she naturally also left. The 3 Ascender powers were led by the Azura God King. Since the Azura God King had spoken, the attitude of the 3 Ascender powers could be considered to have been determined. Humph. Seeing this scene, Zhou Hua also humphed. However, the 3 Ascender powers possessed the unfettered exalted celestial behind them. Thus, they did not fear the 8 great divine families. Everyone, what do you all think? Is it possible for us to chase after that Qin Yu together? The Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua looked to the others. In the end, his gaze stopped at Jiang Fan. Jiang Fan also looked to the Northwest Sage Emperor Zhou Hua and said, Brother Zhou Hua, I am truly sorry. My daughter has been captured by that Qin Yu. As for the betrothal gift, I am too embarrassed to accept it. Brother Zhou Hua sneered in his heart. This Jiang Fan. So it was actually because he was worried about the betrothal gift. Zhou Hua immediately smiled and said, Brother Jiang Fan, there is no need for you to say it like that. According to the description of the betrothal gift, as long as Brother Jiang Fan announces that his son-in-law is my son, we will definitely present the betrothal gift. As for that daughter-in-law of mine that was captured by Qin Yu, we will naturally snatch her back. Jiang Fan's eyes shined. That's right. Of course we will snatch her back. A trace of anger appeared on Jiang Fan's face. This Qin Yu actually dared to openly snatch my daughter in the Sage Emperor's palace. No matter what, I will definitely make him pay the price. Brother Zhou Hua, our floating snow city agrees to the matter of chasing after Qin Yu. I also agree. The utmost West Sage Emperor, who had been standing on the same side as the utmost North Sage Emperor the entire time, said, Brother Zhou Hua, I also agree. The utmost South Sage Emperor also nodded and said. Seeing that the utmost South Sage Emperor had spoken, Zhou Hua was overjoyed. That was because the utmost South Sage Emperor had spoken. Sure enough, this Qin Yu looked down on the Sage Emperors. He is truly too excessive. I also agree with Brother Zhou Hua's suggestion. The Southwest Sage Emperor of the Jade Ripple Lake also nodded. I also agree. The Northeast Sage Emperor of the Forest Ocean City also nodded and said. In an instant, a total of 6 Sage Emperors had agreed. Of the 8 great Sage Emperors of the Divine Realm, The floating snow city and the Mount Blazing Flame were one faction, whereas the Light Lens city, the Jade Ripple Lake, and the Forest Ocean city were another faction. These two factions were opposing each other. Mount Dazzling Gold and the Subterranean city did not help either side. As for the Thunder Punishment city, they stood aloof from worldly affairs. Brother Huangfu, what do you think? Zhou Hua looked to the utmost East Sage Emperor Huangfu. Huangfu lightly smiled and said, "This Qin Yu was originally the Misty Mystic Palace's palace master of our Mount Dazzling Gold. This time around, what he did was indeed excessive. However, he used to be my subordinate. If I were to chase after him now, it would not be good for my reputation. Furthermore, with the 6 great divine families joining hands, it would not matter if I am not included. Our subterranean city does not like to participate in this sort of thing," the Southeast Sage Emperor said. Zhou Hua immediately frowned. Zhou Xian also grew anxious. He was about to speak when Zhou Hua extended his hand to stop him. Zhou Hua looked to the utmost East Sage Emperor and the Southeast Sage Emperor with a smile on his face. "Brother Huangfu, Brother Putai, since the two of you do not wish to participate, I will also not force you. However, I will still announce to the public that the 8 great Sage Emperors will join hands to chase after Qin Yu. Merely, I do not request for the two of you to help. What do you think?" The utmost East Sage Emperor Huangfu slightly frowned. He was about to speak when he was stopped by the Southeast Sage Emperor, beside him via divine awareness voice transmission. "In that case, very well," Huangfu said indifferently. "In that case, you all can discuss how to chase after Qin Yu. I shall take my leave first." Huangfu directly teleported away. "I shall also take my leave." The Southeast Sage Emperor lightly smiled and then also left. Humph! A low humph sounded. When all the Sage Emperors turned around to look, the Wood Mansion's God King Jiang Lan had already disappeared. "Brother Jiang Fan, why would this Jiang Lan?" The utmost South Sage Emperor looked to Jiang Fan in confusion. Jiang Fan naturally remembered Jiang Lan's warning from back then. Once he chose Zhou Xian, it would mean that he had completely severed his relationship with his second brother. "Ever since Zhuo Qiumei died, my relationship with my second brother has not been that good. Forget about it. Let's discuss how to chase after Qin Yu," Jiang Fan said with a light smile. These sage emperors all knew about the matter regarding Zhuo Qiumei. Thus, they naturally did not ask about it anymore. Sigh. Jiang Lan teleported back to the Wood Mansion. He walked to the outside of the pavilion building that Jiang Li was originally in and sighed. However, right at this moment, "Uncle Lan, do not resist." A familiar voice sounded in Jiang Lan's mind. "Little you." Jiang Lan was overjoyed. After that, Jiang Lan disappeared from the Wood Mansion. Chapter 611. Neoverse Purple Mystic Star. You want to find me? Unfortunately, you don't know anything about my Neoverse. Naturally, you won't be able to sense my spatial energy. Qin Yu muttered to himself as he stood at the peak of Donglan Mountain. Qin Yu had directly entered the new cosmos from the sky outside of the floating snow city. Hence, the connection point between the Neoverse and the God world was the location where Qin Yu disappeared. The Neoverse spatial energy passed through that point and spread out, covering an area of a few hundred miles. The spatial energy naturally seeped into floating snow city, and the Wood Manor happened to be within its range. Qin Yu had been quietly observing the entire time. Though several sage emperors were enraged, they used their divine awareness to frantically search. When they swept through the region covered by Qin Yu's spatial energy, Qin Yu was also able to clearly see it. At the peak of the mountain, the wind was cold. Uncle Fu, Qiuzhong Fu, Ho Fei, Kuro, Jiang Li and the rest were beside Qin Yu. Qin Yu hugged Jiang Li with one arm. Ho Fei, Kuro, Uncle Fu, Qiuzhong Fu and the rest were discussing at the side. "Li Er, I'm sorry." Qin Yu lowered his head and apologized softly to Jiang Li. Jiang Li's face was full of smiles. She shook her head at Qin Yu, and then buried her head in Qin Yu's chest. To be able to stay with Qin Yu, Jiang Li had no other wishes. "Big brother, that Jiang." Ho Fei looked at Jiang Li and said, "That North Pole Sage Emperor, to be so biased towards Zhou Xian, it's too much." "Damn it, I can't stand it anymore. When I reach the God King realm, I will go out and kill them. Kuro couldn't help but laugh. What are you laughing at? Hofei looked at Kuro unhappily. Heiyu smiled and said, Monkey, how long will it take for you to reach the God King realm? This godly king is not that easy to obtain. Hofei snorted, and didn't say anything else. Uncle Lan is back. Chinyu suddenly exclaimed in surprise. Hofei and Kuro immediately turned to look at Chinyu. Chinyu's spatial energy was observing the wood mansion. When Uncle Lan returned to the wood mansion, Chinyu sensed that there were no god kings observing them. Therefore, he sent his consciousness into the god world and sent a message. In an instant, Jiang Lan, who wore a dark golden gown, appeared before them. Once Jiang Lan saw Chinyu and Jiang Li, a pleasantly surprised expression appeared in his eyes. He praised, Little you have truly not disappointed me. Uncle Lan, come. Let's go to the Misty Villa to rest. Chinyu's mood was also very good. Bringing Jiang Lan with him, they arrived at the Misty Villa. At this moment, the Misty Villa was still very lively. After all, Chinyu once had over 100 heavenly deity servants. Wu Lan, Wu He, Hong Yu, Lu Shui and them were also present. Lord, Hong Yu and Lu Shui walked out from the Misty Villa and bowed to Chinyu. The Misty Villa was an extremely unique villa. After all, it was once a temporary residence of the East Vanquishing Prince. Chinyu, Jiang Lan, Jiang Li, Hofei, Kuro and them arrived at the main hall. Little you, do you still remember the words I said to you in the mortal realm? Jiang Lan looked to Chinyu and Jiang Li. He had a gratified expression in his eyes. Chinyu also smiled. Uncle Lan, I remember that when I first met Li Er, you had warned me to not fall in love with Li Er. Otherwise I might lose my life. At that time, I seemed to still be a cultivator in the mortal realm. Even in the mortal realm, there were a bunch of people stronger than me. At that time, when compared to the princess of one of the divine realm's 8 great divine families, the disparity in status between us was truly enormous. Chinyu also felt amazed upon thinking about it. When he first met Li Er, how could Chinyu have ever imagined that Li Er was actually such a powerful character? A cultivator from the mortal realm, and a princess of the divine realm. The disparity was truly enormous. However, later on, didn't I also support the two of you being together? Jiang Lan also started to smile. To be honest, today, when I saw you completely falling out with the Sage Emperors in the Sage Emperor's palace for Li Er, I also felt deeply moved. As he said that, Jiang Lan sighed endlessly. His expression was extremely complicated. Back then, although he had resisted, his determination to resist was not complete. Otherwise, when faced with his big brother Jiang Fan's obstruction, he would not only be in a deadlock with his big brother. If a god king were to truly fight with his life on the line, then his big brother would definitely not be able to stop him. However, the Jiang Lan from back then had hesitated. Thus, Jiang Lan had been regretting it the entire time. What happened to Master? Hofei said in a low voice. Kuro, who stood to the side, glared at Hofei. At this moment, Jiang Lan had also woken up. Jiang Lan looked to Hofei and said with a smile, Hofei, you address me as master, yet I, as your master, am completely incompetent. Hofei rubbed his head in embarrassment. Back then, I had picked you up and brought you to the purple mystic star, and allowed you to grow as you wished. Although I allowed you to address me as master, none of your skills were taught by me. Jiang Lan said with a smile. Jiang Lan looked to Chinyu. Little you, what do you plan to do now? What do I do? Is there even a need to ask? If there is a grudge, then we must definitely take revenge. Hofei said. Kuro reprimanded in a low voice. Don't interrupt. As for Chinyu, he was muttering to himself. What should he do now? When Jiang Lan chose Zhou Xian, he no longer had any other choice. He could only turn hostile against the Sage Emperors, and directly take Jiang Li away. What should he do now? There's no other choice. We can only become enemies with them. Chinyu said slowly. The violent element Hofei's eyes immediately shined. Kuro's eyes also flashed with coldness. As for Jiang Li, she looked to Chinyu with a worried expression. However, my current strength is still insufficient. I can only endure. Chinyu said solemnly. Jiang Lan nodded. Uncle Lan, I have a matter that I must trouble you with. Qin Yu's face actually turned slightly red. Jiang Lan was slightly startled. He looked to Qin Yu with a puzzled expression. Qin Yu took a glance at Jiang Li beside him. He then smiled and said, I plan to marry Li Er. Although I am unable to give Li Er a perfect wedding, I still wish for the wedding to be as perfect as possible. Uncle Lan, you can be the female's guardian. Haha. Jiang Lan immediately started laughing. Jiang Li's face immediately turned red. She whispered to Qin Yu, why didn't you tell me about it first? Could it be that you don't agree? Qin Yu deliberately opened his eyes wide and looked to Jiang Li. Being teased like this, Jiang Li's face turned completely red. Qin Yu smiled and then embraced Li Er. Good. I will be the female's guardian. In that case, what about the male's guardian? Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu. At this moment, Qin Yu's expression turned serious. Uncle Lan, regarding this matter, I will need Uncle Lan's help. My royal father, big brother and second brother, are all in the immortal devil and demon realm. I am worried that the Thunder Punishment City will cause trouble for my relatives. No, you don't have to worry about that. Jiang Lan shook his head and smiled. You can rest assured about that. What do the sage emperors value the most? As sage emperors for all these years, what they value the most is their face. For several sage emperors to join hands to take care of you is already their limit. It is even more impossible for them to use some people from the immortal, devil and demon realm to threaten you. If they were to truly do that, then the sage emperors would likely lose all of their face. Qin Yu felt a burst of relaxation. Being too concerned would cause chaos. Hearing what Uncle Lan said, Qin Yu was suddenly enlightened. He had publicly taken away Li Er in the sage emperor's palace and caused Jiang Fan, Zhou Hua and them to be unable to back down. That was the reason why those people wanted to kill Qin Yu, using his relatives to threaten him. Furthermore, these relatives were ordinary people from a low-level space like the immortal devil and demon realm, using weak relatives to threaten him. How could the sage emperors possibly do that? In that case, I am relieved. Merely for my wedding, I must still invite my royal father in them. Uncle Lan, bring me to the immortal devil and demon realm. Qin Yu said. For his wedding, Qin Yu must invite his royal father in them. This, Jiang Lan slightly frowned. Qin Yu and Jiang Li glanced at each other. Could it be that Uncle Lan had some sort of difficulty? However, with the remarkable abilities of God Kings, they were completely capable of instantly entering another cosmic space. Uncle Lan, what sort of difficulty do you have? Qin Yu asked. Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu. He frowned and said, Little Yu, I am worried about a matter. If you were to go out with me, then you would definitely return to the divine realm first. Only then would I be able to bring you into the immortal, devil and demon realm. However, once you return to the divine realm, if you were to encounter the God King's divine awareness searching for you, if you were to be surrounded by several sage emperors, it would be very troublesome. It would be very troublesome. Sage emperors possess clan protection spiritual treasures. Although the clan protection spiritual treasures are also first-rate grand mist spiritual treasures. However, if they were to be combined with the bloodlines of the various great clans, their might would be even more frightening. A single sage emperor is already very powerful. If several sage emperors were to join hands, even if I were to bring you with me, it would still be extremely, extremely dangerous. Jiang Lan said worriedly. Jiang Lan was worried for Qin Yu. If Jiang Lan were to be by himself, then even if several sage emperors were to attack him, he would still be able to escape. However, if he were to bring Qin Yu with him, then it would be different. Uncle Lan, let me tell you the true secret regarding this cosmic space. Qin Yu said with a smile. Secret. Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu curiously. Jiang Lan was also very curious about Qin Yu's cosmic space. For other God Kings, even if they were to create a space, their spatial laws would still be the divine realm's spatial laws. In that space, one would still be able to use the spatial laws. However, in Qin Yu's cosmic space, the divine realm's spatial laws and temporal laws were completely useless. Uncle Lan, this is actually also my own guess. However, I believe it to be most likely correct. This cosmos possesses an independent spatial law and temporal law. It is completely different from the divine realm, the immortal devil and demon realm, and the mortal realm. It could be said that, if the god kings of the divine realm were to come here, they would be trampled upon by me. Qin Yu said with a smile. Jiang Lan sucked in a mouthful of cold air. An independent cosmos, an independent spatial law and temporal law. What did this mean? This cosmos is still in the process of growth. The spatial laws could already be considered to be perfect. However, the temporal laws are still not perfect. Qin Yu continued. Currently, even if I am in the divine realm, I am still able to use the spatial energy of this new cosmos. The spatial energy of the new cosmos is different from the spatial energy of the divine realm. The god kings that control the spatial laws are able to discover the spatial energy of the divine realm. However, they are unable to discover my spatial energy. Haha. Jiang Lan suddenly started laughing loudly. He was laughing incomparably happily. Little you, I completely understand now. In the Sage Emperor's palace, I had once tried to teleport away Li Air. However, Jiang Fan had already set up a spatial confinement around Li Air. I had been confused the entire time. How would you be able to bring away Li Air? Now, it would appear that Jiang Fan's spatial confinement is only capable of confining the spatial energy of the divine realm. It is unable to do anything to your new cosmos spatial energy. Qin Yu nodded. That's right. My spatial energy is capable of covering a range of several hundred miles. I am able to clearly determine whether or not the God King's divine awareness can search through it. Qin Yu said confidently. The gaze that Jiang Lan looked to Qin Yu with was clearly different. Little you, although I do not know what sort of path you train in, I have a feeling that you are different from anyone in the divine realm. They pursue the God King level, the exalted celestial level. However, you seem to be walking on a different path. At this moment, Jiang Lan also realized what this new cosmos signified. Furthermore, the new cosmos was still in the process of growth. The amount of spatial energy that Qin Yu was able to use was still extremely small. If once the new cosmos finished growing and reached its perfect state, then, what sort of level would Qin Yu's strength reach? Uncle Lan, a moment ago, a God King had searched through the new cosmos. That divine awareness should be Zhouhua. However, no one is searching for the divine realm right now. Qin Yu said with a smile. Jiang Lan nodded. Little you, when you turned hostile against the several sage emperors in the Sage Emperor's palace, I only felt joy. However, in my heart, I was still worried for you and Li Air's future. I was worried that the two of you would have to continue to hide. However, now I am extremely confident in you. Jiang Lan's face was filled with smiles. Little you, you're planning to go to the immortal devil and demon realm right now? Jiang Lan was someone who could set off at any moment. Qin Yu took a glance at Jiang Li. With a single glance, the two of them understood what the other was thinking. Qin Yu raised his head and looked to Jiang Lan. He said, let's go right now. Good. Jiang Lan slightly nodded. Qin Yu smiled to Li Air. Li Air, it'll be very soon. Half a day's time is more than enough. With an intention from Qin Yu and Jiang Lan disappeared from the main hall. Qin Yu and Jiang Lan appeared in the sky outside of the floating snow city, for merely a blink of an eye. After that, the two of them once again disappeared from the divine realm, and entered the immortal devil and demon realm. Chapter 612. Immortal Devil and Demon Realm, Immortal Realm, Blazing Sun Galaxy, Virtue Residence Star. Outside the city of Virtue Residence Star, there was a winding mountain range. It was like a huge wave coiling on the earth. This mountain range belonged to the Qin clan. Qin clan. In the immortal devil and demon realm, the Qin clan was a very mysterious clan. Regardless of whether it was the demon realm, immortal realm or devil realm, the three big shots of the three realms were all very friendly to the Qin clan. Furthermore, the strength of the Qin clan itself was also very frightening. Especially those pets that Qin Yu rescued back then. Practically every single one of them possessed astonishing strength. On a lone peak, There were two youngsters sitting across from each other. They were drinking wine and chatting. Of these two people, a youngster with a gentle aura wore a black gown with golden edges. The other youngster wore an earth yellow gown and emitted a domineering aura. These two people were Qin Yu's second brother and big brother. Big brother, I've heard that the little genius of our Qin clan had already broken through the golden immortal realm and reached the level 1 immortal emperor realm. Qin Zheng, who had a light smile on his face, said as he held a wine cup. Qin Feng smiled and said, "You're talking about little Nan, right? That kid is indeed pretty good." However, Qin Feng suddenly sighed. When it comes to genius, little Nan's cultivation speed is much slower than third brother little Yu's. When mentioning Qin Yu, Qin Zheng also sighed. Little Yu has already ascended to the divine realm. With our aptitudes, I'm afraid that it would be very difficult for us to even reach the immortal emperor realm, much less ascending to the divine realm. I wonder when we'll be able to meet little Yu again. When we parted that day, I thought that the next time we meet would likely be a long time away. Qin Feng raised his head and looked to the sky. The two of them both possessed pretty good strength. They were able to see through the atmosphere of the Virtue Residence star and the boundless outer space. However, what use was there in being able to see outer space? They would also be unable to see the divine realm and see their brother Qin Yu. Qin Feng suddenly cried out in surprise as he stared at the sky. Qin Zheng also stared at the sky. He blinked his eyes and tried his best to carefully observe the sky. Two golden lights streaked across the sky. In a blink of an eye, they landed on the lone peak. These two golden lights turned into two people. Qin Feng and Qin Zheng stared at the people who came. "Second brother, I'm not dreaming, right?" Qin Yu said to Qin Zheng in a daze. Qin Zheng's eyes were also fixed on Qin Yu. "I'm not sure if I'm dreaming or not. Could it be that someone deliberately changed their appearance to little Yu's?" Qin Feng muttered. "But why are their auras so similar?" "That gaze! Big brother, second brother!" Someone called out. "Little Yu." Qin Feng was the first to rush over and hug Qin Yu tightly. "Brat, you left for more than 10,000 years, and you still know to come back." Qin Feng scolded jokingly, but his eyes were slightly moist. After parting that day, almost everyone thought that it would be difficult for them to meet again. Many of them even asked Qin Nan to talk to Qin Yu on their behalf when he met him in the God realm. Little Yu actually came back. Qin Zheng was so happy and excited that his face had turned slightly red. Let's go back." Qin Zheng suddenly says, "If Imperial Father knows that you are back, he will definitely be overjoyed. Quickly go and see Imperial Father." Qin Yu also nodded repeatedly. The feeling of being together with one's relatives was truly comfortable. It was like a lonely little boat that had finally returned to a safe harbor. Jiang Lan was also smiling as he watched this scene. At this moment, he was also envious of Qin Yu in his heart. In the immortal devil and demon realm, Qin Yu did not fear being discovered by the God Kings. After all, the God Kings would only be able to search the divine realm with their divine awareness once. If they wanted to search other spaces, they must first teleport to this space. Inside the main hall of the Qin mansion, numerous tables were placed in the main hall. There were several hundred people in the main hall. Practically all of them were from the Qin clan. Other than the main hall, there were also many tables placed in the open air outside the main hall. Set up a banquet to celebrate. This was the order that Qinda gave to the servants after he saw Qin Yu. In all these years, Qinda had never been as happy as he was today. Although Qin Yu had already told Qinda about what had happened in the divine realm after he returned. Although he knew that Qin Yu's situation might be dangerous for him, Qinda was still extremely happy. The people of the Qin clan all knew that Qin Yu was someone who had ascended to the divine realm. However, such a person had actually returned from the divine realm. What an astonishing matter this was. In their hearts, those Qin clansmen felt even more admiration for Qin Yu. After the banquet, Qin Yu, Qinda, Qin Feng, Qin Zheng, Feng Yuzi and other important members of the Qin clan gathered together. "Royal Father, you all know about the situation in the divine realm. I'm sorry, but it's impossible for you all to go to the divine realm for the time being." Qin Yu apologized. Qin Feng's grandson Qin Nan had also become a handsome young man. Third grandfather, those sage emperors of the divine realm are truly good for nothings. What's the point of going to the divine realm? In the past, I had yearned for the divine realm. Now that I've heard about it, I would have to work as a miner. The life there is much more miserable than in the immortal devil and demon realm. I'm not going. Even if they were to invite me to the divine realm, I would not go. Little Nan, don't interrupt when the adults are talking. Qin Feng said in a low voice. Qin smiled. Although little Nan's words are a bit direct, they are also reasonable. Originally, I was also looking forward to that mysterious divine realm. I had imagined how miraculous and beautiful it would be. But now it seems. As he said that, Qin shook his head. Little you, I also approve of what you've done in the Sage Emperor's palace. Qin said with a smile. As for going to that cosmic space of yours, I've also thought about it. How about this? Our Qin clan is willing to go. Those who don't want to go can continue to stay here. Everything will be as royal father wishes. Qin nodded and said. Actually, the Qin clan's days in the immortal devil and demon realm were relatively easy. The majority of them did not have the chance to ascend to the divine realm. In the end, many of them decided to go to Qin Yu's cosmic space. On the new cosmos purple mystic star, over 200 Qin clansmen appeared in the sky above the purple mystic star. These Qin clansmen were all looking at the purple mystic star in shock. Have we returned to the mortal realm? Many people were shocked. This is another cosmic space. This planet was created by the utmost supreme third elder. Its appearance is exactly the same as our hometown. It's just that there aren't many people here. Qin Zheng said with a light smile. Created? Those Qin clansmen were so shocked that they were speechless. This utmost supreme third elder, who is a legend in our Qin clan, is truly too powerful. Create. Destroying was easy, but creating was hard. Especially creating a planet. In the immortal devil and demon realm, they had never even thought about it. The Qin clansmen had already been here for several days. As for Qin Yu and Li Er's wedding, they were also in the midst of intense and lively preparations. The moonlight was like water. Qin Yu and Li Er were leaning against each other as they looked at each other under the moonlight. Li Er, these past few days, you've been chatting with the younger generation of our Qin clan. Is it too awkward? Qin Yu said with a smile. Qin Yu knew very well that the Qin clansmen greatly worshipped him, the utmost supreme third elder. Naturally, those Qin clansmen were also very curious about Jiangli, who was about to marry Qin Yu. Jiangli smiled and nodded. It's all right. I've met your royal father, big brother and second brother back in the mortal realm. Thus, I'm not overly reserved. Qin Yu lightly nodded. Brother Yu, Jiangli suddenly said to Qin Yu. In 3 days, are we really going to get married? Qin Yu tidied up Jiangli's beautiful hair and said with a smile. Didn't you already know about the wedding in 3 days? What's wrong? Are you scared now? A little, Jiangli said softly. It's very normal. In fact, I'm also feeling somewhat nervous right now, Qin Yu said with a smile. You're still nervous? Jiangli raised her head and took a glance at Qin Yu. She wrinkled her nose and said, If you don't believe me, you can listen to my heartbeat. Qin Yu said with a joking smile. Jiangli really did deliberately lean her ear against Qin Yu's chest to listen to his heartbeat. Suddenly, the two of them became quiet. Qin Yu felt the temperature of Jiangli's body. He raised his head and looked at the night sky. His heart was filled with complicated feelings. Qin Yu knew very well that as long as Li Er was with him, she would not care about where they were. However, what about Ho Fei and Kuro? What about the Qin clansmen? Or perhaps, what about his future child with Li Er? Could it be that he was going to let his child hide in the cosmic space forever and never come out? Was he going to hide forever? This was something that Qin Yu could not allow to happen no matter what. For father and the others, for the Qin clansmen, for Fei and Xiao He and the others, and for Li Er and my future child. No matter what, I have to truly fight against those sage emperors. No matter what, I have to hold up the sky for them in the divine realm, Qin Yu said in his heart. At this moment, he felt a sense of responsibility. Although Li Er didn't ask him, He wouldn't forgive himself. Divine realm. I still have to return to the divine realm, Qin Yu said in his heart. The divine realm was the battlefield that belonged to Qin Yu and the divine king. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.